Nami is not the Straw Hat's navigator. At least, not how you think. Nami is not the Straw Hat's navigator. Quite a problematic statement, because the premise of her character is the navigator. And now, due to the breaking we have, moral accountant, emotional treasurer, and quiet co-captain stacked on top of that title like debt on a bad credit card. People see the map and the money and go, "Oh yeah, the hot weather girl who likes cash." To which I say, mate, that's like calling Eni's Lobby that one-door-themed episode. Technically true, spiritually a war crime. Because as far as casual fandom goes, Nami is a vague mess of fanservice shots, money-obsessed gags, and the obligatory girl on the crew. She's the one who hits Luffy, bullies Sanji, and screams about expenses. And, to be fair, Oda absolutely plays into that. But here's an interesting thing. Underneath the bit, she's actually a former child soldier under occupation whose entire personality has been optimized by trauma into a survival system. Every joke about 100 million berries is sitting on top of a childhood where 100,000 berries was the literal price of a life. So this episode is us basically doing an audit on Nami. We're going back to Oikot Village, Belmer's tangerines, and Arlong's rule to see how you build a human calculator who can reprice her own existence on the fly. We're digging into her cartography and meteorology, where good at weather quietly turns into near mystical climate sense that lets her read currents, log poses and sky patterns like a second language. We're following the Clima-Tact as it evolves from Usopp's joke weapon that summons party tricks into a god-slaying staff that literally rewrites the weather and bullies Zeus into becoming a flying emotional support Nimbus. We're also going to treat her relationships like a spreadsheet. Luffy, who she keeps trying to write off as a bad investment, and then reinvests in anyway. Nojiko and Genzo, who show what home costs. Vivi and Robin, who expose her as the crew's emotional treasurer. Sanji, who she low-key manages like a runaway expense report. Oranges, tattoos, money motifs, sky imagery, all of that is data. I want to emphasize this. Outfits are text, gags are evidence, and yes, we are absolutely treating filler scenes as canon-adjacent psychological documents, because if Oda can retrofit mantra into Haki, we can retrofit a spa episode into character studies. Here's the big lens for the whole breakdown. Nami is the narrative weather of One Piece. When her internal barometer shifts, the entire story climate changes. Arlong Park? The moment she breaks, the plot storms. Alabasta? She chooses to sail into a war. Whole cake. She literally weaponizes a Yonko's homie, and you can feel the atmospheric pressure drop around Big Mom. Watch for it. When Nami's mood, price, or forecast changes, the grand line follows. And buried inside all of this is a pattern we're going to keep coming back to. Every major Nami power-up, every big character shift, is preceded by a moment where she has to reprice her own life. The 100 million berries for her village, agreeing to sail with Luffy, charging Big Mom's territory like it's just another storm front. Each time, the greed spikes right before the growth. What if that greed isn't a quirky gag at all, but a calibrated trauma response? Hold that thought, because once we go back to the first map she ever drew, the numbers start looking very different. Oikot Village, the backwards home that built a forward-thinking thief. So we go back to the first map she ever drew, and it's not some grand world chart. It's a kid's scribble of a nowhere village with a name that's literally a joke. Oikot, Tokyo backwards. Oda basically looks at the romantic big city escape fantasy and goes, what if we flip it, crumple it, and toss it in the East Blue? You don't get skyscrapers, you get scarecrows. You don't get neon, you get tangerines. It's the inverted success story. Nami starts as a criminal and only later upgrades into a hero. And to be fair, pre-Arlong Oikot is kind of beautiful in a tax-evading, absolutely broke way. It's small, it's poor, but it's emotionally stacked. You've got villagers sharing food they can't afford, yelling at each other like family, and treating foundlings like community projects. That mix is important because scarcity plus warmth is exactly how you breed Nami's weird combo of greed and generosity. She learns very early that money is always running out, but people will still lend you a coat in the rain. So of course she grows up hoarding every berry while also tipping the universe 30% in random acts of kindness. Here's an interesting thing. Oikot gives her 3 different operating manuals in human form. Belle-Mère is the ideology patch. She's a broke ex-marine who literally chooses to keep 2 kids instead of 2 arms. Her rule is, even if I can't afford you, I'll still claim you. Nojiko is the emotional mirror, the one who absorbs Nami's storms and quietly stabilizes the system. Her rule is, feel everything, but don't let it sink you. And Genzo is the flawed protector, the guy with the windmill on his head and a gun that's mostly powered by stubbornness. His rule is, if you can't win, at least stand in the way. 3 adults, 3 survival algorithms. While all of that is running, Nami is in the corner drawing. Badly at first. Childlike sketches of the village, the coastline, the vague outline of a sea she hasn't actually seen properly. She's literally landlocked emotionally and geographically, staring at an ocean that represents both freedom and the thing that stole her birth parents. So she does the only thing that makes sense to a kid who hates chaos. She starts turning it into lines, symbols, a system. The sea is terrifying, but on paper, its grids and notes and currents she can probably learn to predict. And I want to emphasize, she's doing this as an adopted war orphan in a place that can barely feed itself. Value for her is not stable, it's not guaranteed. The Marines didn't protect her family, war didn't care about her village. Love arrived by accident and could, in her mind, be taken by force at any time. So she treats everything, berries, maps, even hugs, as temporary loans from a cruel universe. To which I say, of course, she becomes obsessed with ownership. She's trying to write contracts against fate. All of that is the baseline. That's Nami 1.0, a little thief with a warm house and a shaky belief that if she just maps things well enough, nothing important will disappear again. And then one day, a certain sore-nosed pirate walks out of the sea with a new definition of ownership, and her entire operating system gets hacked. The patch notes on Nami 2.0? That's where the debt starts racking up. Belle-Mère's last bill, how one bullet prices Nami's entire life. Because as far as software updates go, Arlong's patch is brutal. He installs a paywall on existence. Oikot doesn't just get occupied, it gets invoiced. Every human suddenly has a subscription fee called a head tax, and if you can't pay, you get deleted. Adults cost more, kids are discounted, and that is Nami's first economics class. Your humanity has a price tier. Here's an interesting thing. One Piece is a world of bounties and treasure, but this is the first time we see a literal pricing system on life itself. Arlong walks through the village like a debt collector with teeth, listing amounts the way we'd list power levels. Adult, 100,000. Child, 50,000. It's grotesque, but also disturbingly bureaucratic. And Nami, this little kid who already measures the world in distances and currents, watches her neighbours get measured in cash. You want to know why she later haggles over every berry? Because the last time numbers didn't add up, people died. And then Belle-Mère does the single dumbest, bravest financial decision in the series. She has 100,000. She owes 300,000. The optimal play is obvious. Lie, say she's alone, survive. Instead, she steps out, cigarette, apron, the whole single mom disaster aesthetic, and says, I have 2 children. She literally chooses emotional truth over economic survival. People on the internet love to say she should have lied, to which I say, yes, that's the point. Belle-Mère refused Arlong's system at the one point where it would save her. I want to emphasize how rigged this is. Nami is hiding under the floorboards, hearing her mother put a fixed price on her life and Nojiko's. Belle-Mère doesn't die in a random raid. She dies in an itemized execution, gun to the head, receipt in the background. In Nami's brain, love and debt fuse on the spot. Mum didn't die for freedom in some abstract way. Mum died because they were too poor. After that, of course, Nami grows up believing money is the only reliable shield against loss. The bullet is loud, but the lesson is quiet and permanent. Genzo's reaction locks this in. He's the guy who tried to fight Arlong, got shredded for it, and now walks around with scars that scream, "You can't pay this bill with bravery." He carries survivor's guilt like a tab he'll never clear. Nojiko, meanwhile, goes full quiet endurance, tending Belle-Mare's house, her oranges, her memory, while Nami runs numbers. The village adults all fail to protect them, so Nami internalizes a brutal upgrade. If someone has to pay, it'll be her. She'll be the one who steps between the gun and the grove, but with cash this time. And that grove really matters. Belle-Mare's tangerines are a living inheritance, a renewable resource in a world where Arlong turns life into a finite tax. Fruit comes back every season. Mothers don't. Nami later replants those oranges on the Going Merry and then the Sunny, literally carrying a counter-idea to Arlong's scarcity-based terror. His system says, you will always owe more than you have. Belle-Mare's trees say, some things grow back. But Nami doesn't respond by becoming a generic thief. She specializes. She steals from pirates to buy back her own village, turning crime into a twisted form of filial piety. Every berry she stacks is Belle-Mare's missing 200,000, scaled up to 100 million. It's not greed, it's penance with interest. And the really wild part is how that pirate tax refund career intersects with her dream of mapping the whole world, which is basically her trying to redraw the borders Arlong carved in blood. 8 years under Arlong, when greed is just trauma wearing sunglasses. So when we say Nami turns crime into a pirate tax refund, we're underselling how cursed the fine print actually is. Because as far as predatory contracts go, Arlong basically speedruns every labour violation in one scene. Here's an interesting thing. The deal sounds simple enough on paper. She draws maps for him, she steals treasure for him, and if she can somehow stack 100 million berries, he'll buy Oikot's freedom. That's not a promise, that's a casino coupon. He weaponizes the two things she has left, her talent and her desperation, and then pegs them to an impossible number in a village where kids are literally counting oranges as assets. People like to say Nami is just a cold, money-obsessed thief, to which I say, mate, if your HR department was Arlong, you'd be invoicing oxygen too. She constructs that persona very deliberately. She distances herself from the villagers, pretends to be loyal to Arlong, leans into the greedy witch, branding so hard that even Genzo kind of buys it. The greed is social armor. If they hate her, they won't try to help her. If they don't try to help her, they won't get killed for it. It's emotional asset protection. And while she's doing that, her day job is one of the darkest gigs in the series. She's literally charting the expansion of the regime that murdered her mother. Every new island on Arlong's map is a future Oikot. Every current she traces is a route for more extortion. Imagine loving the sea so much you want to map the whole world, and then your career path is drawing blueprints for colonization. That's not just forced labor, that's weaponized cartography. I want to emphasize how the world keeps proving her paranoia correct. Marines show up. They're colluding with Arlong. The 100 million she grinds for years to save gets casually stolen and trampled by corrupt officers. Every time she gets close to freedom, an institution shows up like, what if we just didn't? And to be fair, if that's your formative data set, you're going to come out of it thinking the only thing you can trust is personal wealth you can physically touch and count. Which is why she counts everything. The 100 million, the exact tribute owed, the precise cost of lending the Straw Hats a ship. Her obsession with numbers isn't just greed, it's a coping mechanism. If she can control the math, maybe she can control the pain. Belle-Mare died over 100,000 berries. Nami's brain turns that into a lifelong equation where every berry is a tiny, desperate attempt to retroactively fix the moment the numbers didn't add up. And then, right when this whole system is running smoothly in its awful way, She tries to scam a rubber idiot on a barrel, who looks at her, hears, "I'm worth 100 million to Arlong," and refuses to price her in berries at all. Which raises a question. What happens when someone walks into Nami's carefully balanced equation and just breaks the calculator? Meeting Luffy, the first man who doesn't care about the price tag. Luffy doesn't just break the calculator. He eats it, smiles, and asks where the meat is. Because as far as he's concerned, Nami isn't an invoice, she's potential crew. When we first meet her, though, she absolutely does not agree. She's introduced mid-heist, robbing pirates with the confidence of someone who's already priced out the risk on a spreadsheet in her head. Luffy and Zoro show up, and she immediately treats them like walking ATMs and disposable bodyguards. You punch things, you tank hits, you let me steal the loot. That's the whole system. Friendship DLC not included. Here's an interesting thing. Almost every early gag with Nami is secretly a lab test. She joins Luffy to rob Buggy, but only after confirming he's dumb enough to tank cannon fire for her. She uses him as a literal human shield, shoves him into danger, and keeps repeating that she hates pirates, while still leveraging his pirate status when it's convenient. The joke is that she's ruthless. The subtext is that she's checking, when I treat you like a tool, do you eventually treat me like one back? And to be fair, she really tries to keep the emotional firewalls up. She refuses to be called a friend. She constantly brings up money, demanding payment, charging interest, itemizing damage to the going merry, like she's the world's angriest insurance adjuster. Every berry mentioned is a brick in the wall. If this stays transactional, it can't hurt when it ends, right? Luffy's response is to completely ignore the invoice. He doesn't care about her stash, doesn't care that she stole the ship, doesn't even care that she keeps running away. He just keeps calling her our navigator before she's agreed to anything. People like to say Luffy is simple, to which I say sure, but he's simple in the way gravity is simple. He has one rule. If you're in the crew, you're in. No price tag, no probation period, no fine print. That's why the Arlong Park climax hits like a truck. Nami, who believes nothing is safe unless she owns it or can pay for it, breaks down and begs for help. And Luffy, instead of giving a speech about debt or promises, quietly puts his hat, his literal life's treasure, on her head. I want to emphasize how insane that is inside her worldview. He entrusts his most precious object to the girl who thinks everything can be stolen, taxed, or taken back. Then the crew moves. Zoro, Sanji, Usopp, they march into Arlong Park with zero financial upside. No bounty bonus, no treasure map, no Orange Grove equity. They're risking their lives to free someone who, on paper, has only cost them money. For Nami, this is the first time value shows up with no receipt attached. Arlong's defeat frees her body and her village, but the deeper chains, the way she uses money, maps, and control as emotional armor, don't snap in one arc. Those are going to take the entire journey and a sky's worth of weather tricks to even begin untangling, from blood to ink, tattoos, scars, and rewriting ownership. Arlong's defeat cuts the chains, but it doesn't erase the barcode. Nami is free, and yet the first thing we still see when she turns around is that mark on her shoulder quietly screaming, "Property of a dead tyrant." One Piece loves this kind of visual contradiction. The body updated, the brand lagging behind like some cursed operating system that refuses to uninstall. Here's an interesting thing about Nami's original Arlong tattoo. It's not just a humiliation stamp. Inside Arlong Park's territory, it's a social passport. That sawtoothed son tells fishmen, she's one of ours, which lets her move through enemy space as a fake ally, while secretly plotting treason. So the same mark that brands her as livestock also functions as her only shield. That's a nasty little survival loop, because as far as identity goes, she has to wear the thing she hates to protect the people she loves. Which is why that stabbing scene hits like a truck. Nami in the road, jamming a knife into her own shoulder over and over, trying to literally carve Arlong out of her skin. It's self-harm, but weaponized as protest. If my body is your contract, I will destroy the contract. She's not being irrational. She's making the only edit she thinks she has access to. And to be fair, in a world where the Marines and the world government have co-signed Arlong's rule, what else is she supposed to do? Then Luffy walks in and refuses the premise. He doesn't say, stop being dramatic. He doesn't tell her to endure. He just puts the hat on her, waits for the ask, and then answers, of course I will. That's the moment he basically says, you don't have to be the one to erase this. I'll break the author of the tattoo instead. Self-destruction gets replaced with delegated destruction, which is the most Luffy solution possible. After Arlong falls, the cover-up isn't subtle. The new tattoo, Tangerine and Pinwheel, is a portable family altar. The tangerines are Belmare's grove, the literal trees Nami replants on the Sunny. The pinwheel is Genzo, the cop who put a toy on his hat to make a traumatized kid smile. She goes from wearing the mark of the man who bought her village to wearing the symbols of the people who chose her anyway. It's not just a cover, it's a counter-argument, and Oda loves this brand alchemy trick. Fisher Tiger's Sun Pirates take the hoof of the celestial dragon and overwrite it with a sun, a shared logo that turns individual slave marks into a communal badge. Hancock hides her mark and then reframes it as a curse she survived. The Mariageois slaves are literally catalogued by their brands. Nami's tattoo sits right in that conversation. You can cover the mark, transform it, or weaponize it, but you can't pretend it never existed. Fashion then becomes the mood ring for all this. Early on, Nami's tops either spotlight the shoulder or strategically obscure it depending on where she is emotionally and socially. With the Arlong mark, exposure equals forced allegiance. With the new tattoo, exposure equals pride. When she's feeling vulnerable or infiltrating, she hides it. When she's with the crew, it's front and center, like a flag. Oda is literally using crop tops as a psychological status HUD, and this is where her body starts shifting from canvas of the past to weather terminal. Because that same arm that once carried Arlong's mark is the arm that will later swing the Clima-Tact, House of Thundercloud homie, and call down Zeus like a personal storm subscription. The scar tissue doesn't just sit there, it's attached to the hand that will eventually rewrite the sky itself. We go from ownership branded into her skin to Nami using that same body as a conduit for actual weather gods. But we'll get to that once Zeus and the ever-evolving Clima-Tact crash into the story. Cartographer of Chaos, Nami's maps as control spells. But before Nami starts literally negotiating with storm gods, she does something arguably weirder. She tries to put the Grand Line on a grid. Her dream is, draw a map of the entire world, to which I say, sure, and next, you're going to alphabetize the Calm Belt and put a leash on Sea Kings. Because as far as impossible One Piece dreams go, Nami's is sneakily one of the most deranged. This world is a political and geological mess. Islands move on log pose cycles, climates hard cut from desert to winter wonderland, and the world government literally bans accurate maps of certain regions. The whole system is designed to keep people lost. And Nami looks at that and goes, cool, I'm going to 100% complete this open world. Here's an interesting thing. That ambition isn't just curiosity, it's trauma management with a protractor. Oikot didn't just get conquered, it got blindsided. Arlong came out of nowhere, from a sea nobody in the village could even conceptualize, and then he weaponized Nami's talent by making her draw charts for his expansion. If she can map every current, every island, every freak thunderhead, then nothing like Arlong appearing from off-screen can ever happen again. The map is a giant never again sign. And to be fair, she actually has the technical skill to almost justify that god-tier confidence. As a kid, she's reading charts that Marines struggle with, casually calling out bearings and distances, and by the time we hit the Grand Line, she's doing on-the-fly course corrections through weather that kills veteran captains. Other pirate crews treat Navigator like a vague side job. The Straw Hats treat Nami like life support. You can feel the power gap every time they outsource navigation, and the replacement is not her. I want to emphasize how much this obsession with complete information is tied to her trust issues. Nami hates unknown variables, unknown islands, unknown factions, unknown weather patterns. It all pings the same alarm bell. Someone else is hiding the knife. Remember how long it takes her to fully trust Luffy with the Arlong situation, or how twitchy she gets anytime money or maps are at risk? Information is safety, and safety was a luxury Oikot never had. Oda quietly wires this into the plot over and over. Arlong's whole dream of fishman supremacy is literally drawn by Nami. His sea charts are blueprints for future oppression. The decision to enter the Grand Line at Reverse Mountain? That's her route. The Skypiea saga exists because she can interpret a map made of clouds and ruins on Jaya's Sky Island projection. Her pen keeps foreshadowing where the story is about to drag the camera next. And then Nami starts doing something even more dangerous than mapping space. She starts mapping time. Her weather prediction isn't just "it might rain tomorrow." It's calling microclimate shifts minutes ahead, reading currents like a calendar. At a certain point, her sixth sense stops looking like talent and starts looking suspiciously supernatural, like the world itself is whispering the forecast in her ear. And that's exactly where the Clima-Tact and Zeus start turning cartography into straight-up sorcery. Weather Witch, Nami's near-supernatural meteorology. So at some point we all collectively agreed, yeah, sure, this orange-haired teenager can outpredict the Grand Line, and just moved on. But if any other character did what Nami does on a weekly basis, we'd be calling them a walking natural disaster with a subscription to God's weather app. Let's actually catalogue this for a second. She calls the storm in the Barati arc hours before it hits. She feels the air go heavy in Arlong Park and knows a squall's incoming. On the Grand Line, she reads a tiny shift in wind and says, "We have 5 minutes before everything tries to kill us." And she's right. In Skypiea, she navigates cloud currents like they're paved roads. In Paradise and the New World, where the climate is a vague mess of murder rain and lava hail, she treats it like a slightly annoying puzzle game. Now, real-world sailors need barometers, sextants, chronometers, cloud charts, current maps, all that beautiful nerd gear. Nami squints at the horizon and licks her finger. She's doing barometric pressure reading by skin, cloud typology by vibe, current analysis by how the ship hums. As far as actual navigation goes, this is absurd. It's like if your friend eyeballed a differential equation and just shrugged, "Yeah, that's about right." And here's an interesting thing. The series keeps framing it as talent, but the scenes themselves keep flirting with precognition. She wakes up in Drum because something feels off, and a blizzard slams them. On the way to Skypiea, she senses the knock-up stream timing down to the minute. Pre-time skip, before observation haki is a system with rules, she is already doing the "I feel danger before it happens" routine. To which I say, if this were any other shunen, we'd have 16 theory videos titled "Nami Secret Haki User," not clickbait. People on the internet like to claim Nami is just the navigator, because as far as raw combat power goes, she's not punching kaiju into orbit. But she's the only Straw Hat whose main opponent is literally the world. Luffy wrestles enemies. Nami negotiates with pressure fronts. Oda uses climate as a character. Calm Belt, Knock-Up Stream, Florian Triangle, New World Eddies. And she's the one person who can talk that character down from a tantrum. That gives her a very specific kind of soft power. When Nami says, "Reef ahead, turn now," Luffy doesn't argue, he just yanks the wheel. Zoro, mister. I don't listen to anyone, will silently adjust course because the alternative is dying stupidly. I want to emphasize how rare that is. This crew treats Yonko like suggestions, but Nami's weather calls are law. And then the irony? This human barometer, this girl who survives by reading chaos, ends up with a clown gag staff from Usopp that slowly evolves into a literal storm-summoning, god-killing weapon. The Clima-Tact starts as party tricks and soap bubbles, so why does it end up rewriting the sky itself? And what exactly is Nami tapping into when the staff finally catches up to her? The original Clima-Tact, when Usopp's gag becomes Chekhov's staff. So the punchline is that Nami, the human barometer, gets handed what is essentially a dollar store magician's wand. Usopp rolls up like, "Behold the Clima-Tact," and its soap bubbles, party tricks, and a vague promise of support. This is not a weapon, this is a prop. It literally has a function called Cool Ball that feels like it should come with a birthday clown license. Here's an interesting thing though. Oda plays it completely straight as a joke. In Alabasta, when the crew is about to fight Baroque works, Usopp proudly presents this segmented staff that can blow hot air, cold air, and soap bubbles, and everyone reacts like, wow, that's something. You can feel the second-hand embarrassment radiating off the page. And to be fair, the early feature list sounds like a failed Kickstarter for smart weather nunchucks. Then we hit the Alabasta fights, and the gag escalates. Nami is literally mid-battle flipping through the instruction manual like someone trying to troubleshoot a printer while the building is on fire. She triggers heat balls and cool balls out of order, accidentally creates mirages, whips up random gusts, and half the time she doesn't know what's going to happen. It's slapstick, it's a mess. But bodies are still getting hit. This is where the Chekhov's staff part quietly kicks in. Because as far as Nami is concerned, if it has rules, it's usable. She starts reverse engineering Usopp's nonsense into a system. Heat plus cool equals sudden fog. Repeated cool in a hot environment equals localized temperature shock. Soap plus airflow equals vision obstruction. You can almost see her mid-fight going, okay, if I can predict it, I can weaponize it. The manual becomes less gag script and more API documentation. And that's the narrative joke. The weapon everyone laughs at, including us, becomes ground zero for some of the most sophisticated battlefield control in the series. People like to say the Clima-Tact was just a joke upgrade, to which I say, mate, your joke upgrade doesn't end up helping kill a god. This is classic long game Oda. Start with a comedy prop, then keep quietly rewarding the one character who actually reads the fine print. I want to emphasize how early the meteorology synergy shows up. Nami isn't just pressing buttons hoping for fireworks, she's layering effects using real atmospheric logic. In Alabasta's dry heat, any humidity she makes is a weapon. In confined spaces, she forces pressure changes and wind tunnels. The Clima-Tact doesn't give her power so much as it gives her knobs on a system she was already reading better than anyone. And once you accept that, the path is obvious. You add sorcery Clima-Tact, you add weather balls, you add actual cloud homies later, and suddenly we're not laughing, we're asking a different question. At what point does girl with a stick start looking suspiciously like a low-key weather logia who never needed a fruit in the first place? Sorcery Clima-Tact and weather balls. Science cosplaying as magic. So post Eni's lobby, Oda basically looks at the prank stick and goes, what if we made this thing illegal? The sorcery Clima-Tact is that moment where the gag weapon quietly gets a PhD, because as far as in-universe tech goes, this is borderline war crimes level. Here's an interesting thing, the sorcery part isn't actually flavor text. Usopp and later Frankie start grafting Skypiea dials into the staff, heat dials, cool dials, thunder dials. So instead of 3 sad little bubbles, Nami now has a modular weather platform. Each segment can store, release and redirect specific climate effects, like a Swiss army knife, built by a meteorology nerd and a lying sniper with too much free time. Weather balls are where it really clicks. Those goofy spheres she pops out, they're basically packets of pre-bottled climate. Heat, cold, electricity, moisture, air pressure, all tagged and stashed. She's not just throwing fire or ice, she's tossing discrete variables into the battlefield. 1 heat ball, 1 cool ball, 1 thunder ball, And suddenly, she's doing algebra with the sky, while her opponent thinks they're in a magic show. Thunderbolt Tempo is the cleanest example. She doesn't summon lightning from nowhere. She manufactures a thunderstorm on fast forward. Raise humidity, create an updraft, stack a charge with the thunder dial, then give it a path to ground through the enemy. That's not a spell, that's applied meteorology, with a side of assault and battery. Mirage Tempo, same deal. She bends light by forcing localized hot and cold air pockets, literally hacking refraction so she can create clones. It's less witch illusion, and more I paid attention in science class and now you die. And to be fair, the line between technology and sorcery in One Piece was already a vague mess. We've got snails as phones, cola cyborgs, laser pacifistas, and then this girl, with a staff, doing what looks like Paramecia cosplay without a devil fruit in sight. People in-universe call it sorcery because they don't have the vocabulary for portable climate control system, to which I say, Oda is just sneaking soft sci-fi into a shonen about rubber piracy and daring us to notice. I want to emphasize how much Nami's confidence tracks with this upgrade. Early on, she's literally reading the Clima-Tact manual mid-fight, panicking as she triggers flower bouquets and party tricks. Post Eni's lobby, she's improvising multi-step combos on the fly, chaining weather balls, redirecting gusts, updating her read of the battlefield in real time. That's the same girl who once had zero control over her own village, now micromanaging the atmosphere like it's her bank account. And even this isn't the ceiling. The sorcery Clima-Tact plus weather balls is just the tutorial mode for what happens when a fragment of Big Mom's soul, Zeus, gets folded into the staff. At that point, we're not just talking bottled climate, we're talking a semi-sentient thundercloud familiar. Nami stops imitating a weather logia and starts looking like a sky-wielding demigod who accidentally speedran the fruit meta without ever touching the ocean's curse. Zeus and the god-slaying staff, when the weather starts talking back, and then the weather starts talking back. Because once your staff can whimper, panic, and beg for its life, we've officially left funny gadget territory and entered this thing probably has a soul territory. So Zeus, on paper, he's a special homie created directly from Big Mom's soul, a living thundercloud that should be one of the most dangerous weapons in the new world. In practice, he's a food-motivated himbo cloud who defects because Nami gives him better snacks. We watch him go from reluctant, opportunistic ally on whole cake, helping Nami fry Big Mom's own army, to getting literally abandoned for Hera, dying, and then being stuffed into the Clima-Tact like a weather genie with attachment issues. To which I say, peak One Piece career trajectory. Here's an interesting thing about that merger. Mechanically, Nami now wields a piece of a Yonko's power without touching a devil fruit. She's basically speed-running the Logia fantasy via hardware. The Wano-era Clima-Tact stretches, morphs and channels Zeus's body, turning into a transforming god-slaying staff that can tank blows, extend for melee, and then detonate into city-level lightning. And, to be fair, this patches one of Nami's oldest issues. She always had brains and precision, but her raw output lagged behind the monster trio. Zeus is the answer to the age-old question, what if the navigator could just delete people? Because as far as feats go, the ulti fight is the big thesis statement. Ulti is a flying six, an ancient Zoan with absurd durability who can casually headbutt Luffy. Pre-time skip Nami wouldn't scratch her. Wano Nami with Zeus fully integrated, calls down Raite, detonates ulti from the inside, and actually finishes a high-ranking Beast Pirates officer on panel. That's not support damage, that's a legitimate heavy hitter moment in a war full of Conqueror's haki freaks. Suddenly, when the crew splits, Nami isn't just the one who needs a bodyguard, she is the artillery, and the symbolism is just rude in the best way. Nami, the girl who was literally owned by a fishman tyrant, now commands a fragment of a tyrant emperor's soul. She used to be branded with Arlong's mark. Now she's the one branding the sky with Big Mom's stolen lightning. That's not just a power-up, that's poetic justice written in storm fonts. The same world that crushed her village is now accidentally funding her weather revolution. I want to emphasize how their personalities lock in too. Zeus is cowardly, needy, and desperate for approval. Nami is a former survival mode con artist who learned to manipulate monsters to stay alive. She bullies him, bribes him, threatens to replace him, classic Nami tactics. But now, they're aimed at a literal storm. It's her Arlong-era coping strategies, repurposed into command of nature itself. Is it morally clean? Not really. Is it thematically perfect? Absolutely. So if Nami can weaponize a Yonko's homie with 0 fruit and 1 traumatized childhood, what does that say about her ceiling? How many more weather spirits, sky currents, or even ancient weapons-level climate systems are waiting for her to hijack? And at what point does the cat burglar stop being human and start becoming the definitive weather god of the seas? Luffy and Nami, captain, navigator, and the art of shared control. So if Nami is quietly auditioning for the role of Weather Empress, who's the one idiot on this ship she'll actually let hold the crown next to her? That's where Luffy walks in like, "I'm captain," and the story immediately replies, "Yes, but she's the one driving." Here's an interesting thing about Arlong Park that people kind of flatten into a meme. We all remember the Luffy help me panel, the stabbing, the hat on her head, the walk. But that moment is basically a hostile takeover of Nami's entire operating system. Up to that point, her money-first survival script is unbreakable. When she finally asks for help, Luffy doesn't give a speech, doesn't negotiate, doesn't ask about the 100 million. He just puts the hat down and moves. That silent acceptance is him saying, "Your dream is mine now." And to which I say, that's the real debt she never pays off. From that point on, watch how casually he hands her power. Luffy never questions her navigational calls. Log Pose says, "Wait." They wait. Weather looks suicidal? He backs off. In a series where this man will punch a celestial dragon on sight, the only thing he won't punch is a Nami forecast. As far as the ship's physical direction goes, she has literal veto power over the Pirate King. And, to be fair, she uses it. Constantly. Nami is one of the few people who can scream at Luffy mid-mania and not get brushed off. Eni's lobby Sea Train? She's the one yelling about currents and timing. Thriller Bark Fog, New World Sea Kings, Whole Cake's insane weather system. She's always the voice going, "We actually die if we do this stupidly." Everyone else argues with Luffy on ideals. Nami argues with him on reality. That's a different weight class. What this creates is a really clean dual lead idea. Luffy decides where in the dream sense. We're going to the most dangerous island. We're saving that country. We're picking a fight with that emperor. Nami decides how in the logistics sense, routes, detours, waiting for a log pose reset, exploiting jet streams, abusing her borderline supernatural weather sense. He authors the myth. She co-authors the itinerary. And the comedy is the camouflage. The beatings over debt, the pay me for saving you, the bounty counting meltdowns, those are pressure valves on a partnership that, structurally, is terrifyingly interdependent. Luffy without Nami is literally canon. Every time he's separated from her, he gets lost, stranded, or swallowed by some ecosystem that hates him personally. Nami without Luffy? She goes back to drawing maps for monsters. I want to emphasize that this captain-navigator dynamic quietly scales out. The same way she regulates Luffy's impulses and trajectory, she starts regulating everyone else's, money, emotions, even when the crew is allowed to fall apart. She's not just steering the ship, she's steering the Straw Hat's internal weather, and that's about to get way messier when we zoom out to the whole crew. The emotional treasurer, how Nami quietly manages the crew's hearts. So when we zoom out from just Luffy, Nami basically turns into the Straw Hat's HR department, therapist, and IRS all in one, which is a terrifying amount of power for someone who will absolutely bill you for emotional labor. She keeps the logbooks, but she's also keeping the vibes, quietly running this invisible morale spreadsheet in her head. Because as far as Nami is concerned, the crew is one big balance sheet. Who's stressed? Chopper, shaking in the corner. Who's slacking? Luffy and Usopp, inventing a new way to break the ship. Who needs grounding? Sanji, whose brain has left the building again. Watch how often she walks into a scene, clocks the emotional deficit in 2 seconds, and adjusts the budget with a smack, a hug, or a threat to charge interest. Here's an interesting thing. Her scolding is targeted. When Luffy and Usopp are being idiots, she doesn't just yell because it's funny, she's protecting group focus. Water 7 is the clearest version. When Usopp leaves, everyone is spiraling, and Nami is the one who actually asks, "What about the going merry?" in concrete terms. Not, "Are we sad?" but, "What can we afford to feel right now without sinking?" That's emotional accounting. Contrast that with how she handles Chopper. She doesn't bonk him for panicking. She kneels down, reassures him, gives him simple, actionable instructions. Same Nami, different line item. With Robin, it's even softer. In Eni's lobby, when Robin finally screams that she wants to live, Nami's reaction isn't a joke. It's this immediate recalculation. Okay, this woman has decided she's worth saving, so we're going all in. She treats Robin's self-worth like a switch that changes the entire risk profile of the mission. And to be fair, this hyper-awareness doesn't come from nowhere. She watched her entire village get turned into a hostage situation by Arlong. She lived through a world where one person's bad decision, one moment of disunity, meant everyone paid. So now she is obsessed with internal cohesion, almost to a pathological degree. If the Straw Hats fracture, that's Oikot village all over again. She's not just scared of losing friends, she's scared of the math of loss. That's why in crises she's the one asking the unsexy questions. How much food do we have? How many days of water? How long can the log pose store this island? When everyone else is reacting to the vague idea of danger, she is the one turning it into numbers, time limits and routes. It's not that she's braver or smarter. She just refuses to let the crew operate on emotional credit. And then you get the greed gags, which people love to flatten into haha money goblin, to which I say, mate, that's textbook survival script. Pay me if you want help creates a safe, transactional frame so caring doesn't feel like a free vulnerability. She'll demand a fee, complain about the interest rate on your stupidity, and then help anyway. The joke is the armor, the action is the truth. All of this gets way more revealing once you look at specific relationships. With Vivi, Nami is constantly recalculating the cost of a princess trying to be a pirate. With Robin, she's tracking trust like it's a volatile stock. With Sanji, she's weaponizing his devotion as a resource while quietly refusing to cash it in all the way. Those emotional ledgers are where Nami's treasurer role stops being cute and starts getting uncomfortably honest, which is exactly where we're heading next. Nami and Vivi, Nami and Robin, mirrors, warnings, and found family. So when we say Nami is the crew's emotional treasurer, nowhere is that clearer than with Vivi and Robin, because as far as narrative mirrors go, Oda basically holds up 2 giant reflective billboards and yells, "Do you get it yet?" Vivi in Alabasta is Nami if Arlong Park had gone slightly differently. Same desperate smile, same fake optimism, same "if I just endure a little longer, maybe my country won't die." Here's an interesting thing about Alabasta that people kind of speedrun. Nami is literally dying of fever and still sneaks out to fight Miss Doublefinger. That's not just shonen grit. That's her seeing Vivi about to do the exact solitary martyr routine she pulled for 8 years and going, absolutely not. We are not speedrunning my trauma as a spin-off. When she says she's going because Vivi needs her, it's not empty support. It's a hard veto on Vivi walking into Crocodile's war alone, the way Nami walked into Arlong's deal alone. People like to frame that as Nami being reckless, to which I say, mate, that's the most calculated emotional decision in the arc. She'd rather risk her life in a controlled, shared fight than let Vivi keep gambling her entire kingdom on secret self-sacrifice. And to be fair, that's Nami's whole thing. She can't stop Luffy from promising the moon, but she can make sure someone packed water and a map before we start jumping into the sky. With Robin, the mirror is quieter but way sharper. Nami's initial suspicion after Alabasta isn't just former Baroque works scary lady. It's, I know what it looks like when someone joins a crew planning to leave the second it hurts. She recognizes the vibe. Robin is the older, cooler version of the girl who also decided her life was worth less than everyone else's dream. Post Eni's lobby, when Robin screams, "I want to live," that's basically the HD remaster of Nami stabbing her shoulder and begging for help at Arlong Park. I want to emphasize how Nami functions as a translator in both arcs. Luffy's power is reckless empathy. He yells, "I'll save you" at Vivi, "Let's live together" at Robin. Nami is the one who turns that into a system, logistics, timing, routes, who punches which warlord first. She's the one telling Vivi when to trust Luffy's insanity, and she's the one quietly checking Robin's expression, adjusting the sails of the conversation every time Robin flinches at the word friend. And then you get the micro stuff. Nami sharing clothes with Vivi, lending Robin outfits, offering advice about money, about running, about when to stop running. These tiny gestures are emotional microtransactions. That's her real currency. She's paying down other women's loneliness in installments, which sets up a fantastic clash with Sanji, whose entire deal is maxed out over-the-top devotion. What happens when a woman who only trusts quiet, consistent care is stuck with a man who treats chivalry like a gacha banner he has to pull on every 5 seconds? We'll get into that very messy exchange rate next. Sanji, Genzo, and the men who serve Nami. So on one side we've got Genzo, the man who literally stapled a windmill to his head and pointed a gun at a warlord. And on the other, we've got Sanji, who would probably saute his own organs if Nami asked nicely. That's Nami's male protection spectrum, from gruff scarecrow dad to walking simp economy. Let's start back in Oikot. Genzo is that classic small-town cop archetype if the archetype was a chain-smoking guy, with a body made of scar tissue and regret. He couldn't save Belmer. That failure is carved into his face. But he keeps doing patrols, keeps stockpiling weapons, keeps watching Nami from the shadows, like a one-man neighborhood watch who never clocks out. And to be fair, that's the only kind of safety Nami has ever known. Adults who tried really hard and still lost. Watch how she talks to him when she comes back home. She's half, "Ugh, stop fussing," half, "I know you'd die for me, please don't." That annoyance is a defense mechanism. Genzo's protectiveness is a relic from a childhood where effort did not equal outcome, where love did not equal survival. So when he yells at her for risking herself, she snaps back, but she listens. Because as far as Nami is concerned, Genzo is proof that someone can care deeply and still be powerless against the system. Sanji is that idea flipped and then deep fried. Here's an interesting thing. Sanji has power. Real, on screen, kicks a pacifista in half power. And he spends a ridiculous amount of it cooking, fighting, and literally bleeding for Nami on command. She says, "I need 1 million berries." He's already mid-nosebleed bank transfer. She says, "Carry my bags, fight that guy, make me food." And he turns it into a lifestyle brand. People call that toxic simp behavior, to which I say, yes, but it's also a narrative stress test. Nami keeps pushing his devotion with impossible demands, cartoonishly one-sided deals, because she's waiting for the bill. Arlong taught her that every favor has compound interest. Genzo couldn't charge her anything. He had no leverage. Sanji absolutely could. He feeds her, protects her, literally upgrades her god-staff weapon, and never once says, "You owe me." That's not just comedy. That's a direct challenge to her whole internal accounting system. And I want to emphasize it's not just these two. Luffy does the same thing in a quieter way. He declares war on Arlong, on Eni's lobby, on the world government's map ban basically, all on Nami's behalf, and never asked for repayment beyond, "Be my navigator." These are men who serve Nami without owning her, who put their power at her disposal without turning her into property. That slowly rewires the Arlong era association in her head, where male strength equals a hand on her shoulder pushing her back down. Zoom out, and it gets messier. If Nami's whole life is a negotiation between freedom and ownership, what do her symbols actually say? Money, the thing Arlong weaponized, becomes her tool. Oranges, Belmer's grove replanted on the sunny, turn exploitation into inheritance. The sky she reads and the tattoos she rewrites are literally her body and her world map, saying, "I decide the forecast now." But if she keeps surrounding herself with people who give, without charging interest, what happens the first time Nami has to choose between protecting that freedom and cashing in on it? We need to talk about what those symbols are quietly steering her toward next. The cartographer's curse. Why Nami draws maps of a world that hates her. So when Nami says, "My dream is to draw a map of the entire world," it sounds cute and merchandisable, right? To which I say, that is not a dream. That is a war declaration written in coloured pencil. Because as far as Nami is concerned, the world already drew a map of her life once. Arlong literally charted her village into neat sectors of tribute and terror. This house pays, that house burns, this child lives, that child drowns. He turns Oikut into a spreadsheet of suffering and Nami's body into a line item. 8-year-old her is forced to draw maps for the guy who owns her ocean. So of course her adult dream isn't just, "I like geography." It's, "I will redraw the borders of the world that caged me." Here's an interesting thing. Belmer's whole philosophy is, you don't get to choose your parents, but you can choose your life. Nami hears that, then immediately lives a life where every choice is held at knife point by a fishman with a contract. When Arlong dies and that contract finally burns, what does she do? She doesn't run inland. She doesn't swear off the sea. She walks back into the water that functioned as a prison and says, "Fine, if I can't escape it, I'm going to own it." The ocean stops being a cage and starts being a canvas. And in One Piece, cartography is insanely political. The world government literally bans mapping certain routes, censors islands, and controls logpost data like state secrets. Their maps are propaganda, blank spots where Ohara used to be, redacted chunks of history, a nice clean edge around Mariajois. Nami's personal world map is a counter map, a quiet, "No, actually, this island exists, these people live here, this current flows this way, your story is a lie." It's not loud like Luffy punching a celestial dragon, but it's the same crime. That's what I want to emphasize with the cartographer's curse idea. The better your map, the less you can pretend the world is fine. Nami is literally drawing a catalogue of injustice. Slave routes, government no-go zones, weather patterns warped by someone's ancient crime. Every time she updates a chart, she's also updating the list of things she can't unknow. And to be fair, she never makes a speech about this. She just quietly keeps filling pages while everyone else is arguing over meat. Watch her on the Going Merry and the Sunny. The crew treats her all-nighters with the lamp and compass as a quirky "Nami's being a nerd again" thing. In reality, that's her coping mechanism. If she can measure it, she can't be blindsided by it like Arlong blindsided Belmer. She inventories clouds the way she used to inventory tribute money. It's the same survival system, reskinned. Now contrast that with Luffy. His dream is pure power fantasy. Pirate king, king of freedom, punch god, eat lunch. Nami's dream is structurally dependent on his. She wants to know the world he'll sail through, to literally chart the stage for his legend. But emotionally, it's completely different. He wants the crown. She wants the receipts. He breaks the cage. She documents what the cage did. And Oda keeps sneaking upgrades into that project. Every major arc either levels up her knowledge or her tools. From basic sea charts to Grand Line currents, from gag Clima-Tact to a weather staff that bullies Zeus, from single log poses to triple needle nightmares in the new world. The story is quietly saying, pay attention, this map is going somewhere. The real question is, what happens when Nami's finished map doesn't match the world the government insists exists? That's where her navigation stops being support skill and starts being a crime scene report. Weather Witch in a world of storm gods, Nami's sixth sense. Explained, so when the world government's map and Nami's map start disagreeing, who are you betting on? The people who lost an entire island in Ohara, or the girl who can smell a squall from behind a wall? Because as far as raw, terrifying competence goes, Nami is one of the most broken characters in the series, and nobody treats it like that. Go back to East Blue. Before devil fruits start doing tax fraud on physics, Nami is casually calling weather like she's checking the time. She predicts a storm in the buggy arc off a tiny shift in wind and a distant cloud bank. She reads currents around the Barati while everyone else is busy having trauma over Mihawk. On the Going Merry, she's the only one who can steer without turning the ship into modern art. And the series plays this as background noise like, yeah, of course the cat burglar is also a one-woman meteorological institute, don't worry about it. Here's an interesting thing. In real life, none of this is magic. Basic seamanship is a messy little system of pressure, clouds, wind and currents. Dark, towering cumulonimbus clouds? Thunderstorms, high, thin cirrus arriving before a front. Weather's about to flip. A sudden drop in barometric pressure. Storm incoming. Sailors literally watch wave direction to find hidden currents. Nami is constantly shown doing the anime version of that. Staring at the horizon, feeling the wind on her skin, tracking how the ship rocks. Oda even draws those little exclamation panels when she notices a change in air or temperature. It's not sorcery, it's data. Then you hit the big set pieces. Reverse mountain? Everyone else is screaming. Nami is counting currents, wind angles, and pressure shifts in real time and threading the ship up a water roller coaster. Entering the Grand Line, she's juggling the log pose, freak weather, and ocean currents like she's speed running a nautical exam. Skypia's knock-up stream is literally a vertical geyser of compressed air and water. Nami is the one who reads the clouds and waves and says, yeah, that's our stupid, probably lethal path. Let's go. Early New World? She's passing triple log poses and random lightning storms while Luffy tries to befriend death. People in-world keep calling her a witch, to which I say, yes, if by witch you mean someone who understands pressure gradients. And to be fair, Oda leans into the broomstick aesthetic later, but the text is always grounding it in observation. She studies, she charts, she builds weather eggs. What looks like precognition is just pattern recognition so refined it feels like she's seeing 5 minutes into the future. I want to emphasize how close this feels to observation haki without ever being labeled that. In a fight, observation is, I read your intent before you move. For Nami, a storm is just a giant opponent whose tells are wind shifts and cloud layers. She's reading that opponent constantly. The Weather Witch branding is a narrative disguise. It lets Oda smuggle in hard navigation lore without turning One Piece into a textbook. You don't feel like you're learning about low-pressure systems. You feel like you're watching your cool thief sister bully the sky. And once you frame it like that, the Clima-Tact stops being a gag and starts looking inevitable. First she understands the weather, then she starts weaponizing it. Next section, we need to talk about how a joke staff turned into a god-killing barometer with feelings. From party trick to natural disaster, the Clima-Tact's embarrassing origin story. So when Usopp hands Nami the first Clima-Tact in Alabasta, we're not watching the birth of a god weapon. We're watching a children's party magician audition. On paper, this thing is a failure. It's literally introduced as a stage prop. Extendable staff, 3 goofy balls, heat, cool thunder, and a manual that reads like a dollar store science kit. And to be fair, the early demonstrations are comedy crimes. Nami tries to impress Vivi and just creates sad bubbles. She whips out a cyclone and gets a lukewarm breeze. Against Miss Doublefinger, she's doing accidental self-flashbangs, stabbing the ground, popping soap bubbles in her own face. The crew clowns on it, the enemy clowns on it. And because as far as first impressions go, this is a mess, we clown on it too. You're not thinking, ah yes, endgame weather goddess. You're thinking, Usopp built a vape pen. But here's an interesting thing. The joke is doing cover-up work. The narrative uses slapstick to aggressively lower your guard. Miss Doublefinger literally stands there mocking Nami's toy, while Nami is in real time running a physics lab. The audience mirrors that. We write the Clima-Tact off as a gag, which lets Oda smuggle in one of the most conceptually busted tools in the story without setting off your shonen power creep alarms. Because under the party trick packaging, the system is actually tight. Heat Ball raises air temperature, Cool Ball drops it, Thunderball adds charge and moisture. That's it. Super simple. But when you start combining them, you're playing with temperature differentials, air pressure gradients, localized humidity. That is, the basic ingredients of real weather. Hot air rises, low pressure pools in surrounding air, moisture condenses, discharge follows. Nami isn't casting spells, she's forcing microclimates into existence. Watch the Alabaster fight with that lens, and suddenly her fumbling looks different. Every time she messes up a combo, she learns something. Okay, heat then. Cool makes fog. What if I stack heat, then thunder? She's iterating like an engineer who just got a new prototype, not a brawler who got a new sword. The timing issues, the misfires, the self-inflicted damage. That's the blueprint of a future god-slaying staff, visible if you're willing to pause the gag and do the math. And I want to emphasize, the real weapon here is Nami's brain. Usopp could never use this thing properly. Luffy would press every dial at once and summon a lawsuit. The Clima-Tact is only broken in the hands of someone who can model complex moving weather systems in her head mid-fight, while also tracking enemy positioning, crew safety, and the environment. That's Nami's superpower. So when people say the early Clima-Tact is useless, to which I say, mate, you're useless. The staff is training wheels. It forces Nami to think like a battlefield meteorologist, long before sorcery Clima-Tact, long before Zeus. Oda wraps an endgame tier idea in a rubber chicken and lets it wobble around Alabaster until you stop paying attention. And that's exactly how he hides the pieces he's going to use to literally rewrite the sky later. Because if this is what she can do with party tricks, what happens once the staff itself starts wanting to make storms? Sorcery, Clima-Tact, when Usopp accidentally invents a weather-based devil fruit. So the answer to what if the staff itself wants to make storms is, it becomes a devil fruit that you can put down on the table when you're done. Post Enies lobby, Usopp basically speedruns Vegapunk by duct taping Skypia's entire technology tree onto a gag weapon. And to be fair, it works way better than it has any right to. Here's an interesting thing. The sorcery Clima-Tact isn't just more weather balls. The upgrade is that it starts integrating dials and precision control, so those goofy heat, cool, and electric bubbles turn into programmable weather packets. Impact and heat dials let her store and release energy on command. The staff segments retract and extend. And suddenly, Nami's not just swinging a stick, she's literally inputting commands into a handheld climate engine. That's where her moves stop being party tricks and start reading like a physics syllabus. Mirage tempo? That's Nami, weaponizing light refraction and temperature gradients to bend the air around her body. She's creating density differences so your eyes misinterpret her position, which is a very fancy way of saying she unlocked stealth by understanding humidity. Thunderlance tempo is the charge-up branch. She stacks heat and cold to create violent updrafts, builds charge like a budget Goro Goro no Mi, then spears you with a guided lightning rod. Tornado tempo is Vortex Dynamics 101. She's using rotating air columns and pressure differentials to grab a guy the size of a building and yeet him like garden trash. People will say, okay, But that's still just tools, not a real power. To which I say, tell that to the people who got one-shot by a weather app. Because as far as function goes, this is devil fruit territory. Lightning on command? That's NL cosplay. Optical illusions and mirages? That's in the same conceptual drawer as paramecia weirdos who distort perception or space. Wind and localized storms? Logia adjacent, just with patch notes. I want to emphasize how modular this is. A devil fruit locks you into a single theme. Nami's system is basically DLC. If she understands the phenomenon and Usopp can jury-rig a dial or mechanism, it becomes part of her kit. Her limits are stamina, timing and creativity, not, sorry, my fruit only does wax. She can pivot from crowd control to single-target nukes to battlefield control mid-fight, just by swapping combinations. And we see the narrative flip. Against CP9, the sorcery Clima-Tact lets her stop being support navigator and start deleting Khalifa with precision lightning and mirage feints. Thriller Bark? She's not just hiding behind the big swordsman, she's evaporating zombies and blowing away Or's limbs with concentrated weather bursts. Early Fishman Island skirmishes, she's the one dropping area denial storms in a 3D ocean arena, which is hilariously overqualified for girl who steals wallets. The best part is that this is a co-authored power system. Usopp's engineering plus Nami's meteorology equals a weapon that literally runs on trust. She believes his ridiculous gadgets will work. He believes her weather sense will keep them alive, and the staff becomes a physical record of that collaboration, rather than some random mystical gift. And if this is what they can do with scrap metal and second-hand dials, what happens when you plug an actual fragment of a Yonko's soul into that circuit and tell it to love her? Zeus, the Yonko soul that turned Nami into a mid-range raid boss. So yeah, you plug a fragment of a Yonko's soul into the staff and tell it to love her, and suddenly, the girl who used to bonk Luffy for lunch money is throwing around island-level weather like it's pocket change. One Piece power creep is a mess, to which I say, that's exactly why it's fun. Quick refresher, Zeus is not just a funny cloud. He's one of Big Mom's 3 main homies, literally manufactured from her soul alongside Prometheus and Napoleon. That means he's powered by Charlotte Linlin's whole deal. Gluttony, mood swings, and a personality that shifts from doting grandma to kaiju in about 3 seconds. So when Nami ends up with Zeus, she's not just getting a pet, she's hijacking a piece of a top-tier endgame boss. Here's an interesting thing, the bond doesn't flip overnight. It starts as Nami doing what she's always done under tyrants, weaponizing their hunger. She bribes Zeus with candy and tasty weather, flatters him, plays into his neediness. It's Arlong all over again, except this time she's consciously running the con. We watch Zeus go from Mama's loyal thunder nuke to guy who will accidentally fry his own crew because Nami said please. By Wano, that vague sympathy hardens into a real choice. He literally abandons Big Mom mid-war to become Nami's personal storm. Mechanically, this is where the system goes crazy. Before Zeus, the Clima-Tact is a clever gadget. With Zeus, it becomes a living, self-aiming thundercloud. He can read intent, track moving targets, and correct Nami's trajectories in real time. She doesn't just summon lightning, she points a sentient railgun that wants to impress her. Because as far as combat ceilings go, that's a massive jump. We see it immediately in the feats. Zeus-enhanced Thunderbolt tempo isn't a party trick, it's a battlefield reset button. Nami drops massive area of effect strikes that one-shot people who used to be you need gear 2 and a speech level problems. Ulti is the obvious example. Ancient Zoan, durable, Yonko affiliated, and Nami just deletes her with a Zeus-boosted lightning blast. And to be fair, the series plays it half comedy, but the scaling is loud. A former Arlong hostage is now a credible threat to a Yonko's officers. That shifts her battlefield role. Early Nami is a precision tactician, mirages, small clouds, surgical zaps. Post-Zeus Nami is area denial. She controls space and tempo, forcing enemies to move where she wants or get cooked. The crew's navigator becomes, in combat terms, an air traffic controller of death. Symbolically, it's wild. The girl whose body was literally branded as property now wields a soul fragment of one of the most terrifying owners in the series as a tool. The childhood power dynamic is not just gone, it's inverted. She doesn't fear the storm anymore, she rents it. And I want to emphasize the accidental part. This is Nami with a borrowed, improvised god cloud. So what happens if she ever gets weather tech or allies on this scale on purpose? If Vegapunk, Uranus-level sky weapons, or even Elbaf's storm giants ever enter that equation? How far can one normal human push the sky itself? Log poses, eternal poses, and why Nami is basically the Straw Hat's operating system. And speaking of sky weapons, we kind of need to talk about the thing that quietly makes all of this even possible. The Grand Line is a broken GPS nightmare, and Nami is the only reason this series isn't 2 chapters long and ends with, they got lost and died. Because as far as navigation goes, the Grand Line is malicious compliance. Normal compasses literally don't work. Every island has its own magnetic field. Those fields don't point north, and the sea currents are a vague, sentient mess. Oda basically said, what if Google Maps gaslit you? And then invented log poses as the world's jankiest patch. They lock onto an island's magnetic signature. Then, after a delay, they reset and point to the next island in that route. It's not a map, it's a forced tutorial path. Here's an interesting thing. When Nami first hears this, she hates it. She's a blue sea navigator who grew up reading winds, stars and currents. Suddenly a watch is telling her, no, actually, you go here now. She's skeptical, she complains, she treats the log pose like an unreliable app. But then she speedruns the learning curve. By Whiskey Peak and Little Garden, she's already predicting lock times, compensating for weather, and using the delay as a planning window. The rest of the crew is like, cool magic needle, while she's reverse engineering the operating manual. Then eternal poses show up, and the system gets political. A log pose forces you to follow the magnetic progression. An eternal pose is hard-coded to one island forever. Governments, warlords and crime syndicates hoard them because if you control which islands are easy to reach, you control trade, smuggling, and who can even show up to yell at you. Alabaster's eternal pose, diplomatic leverage, marine-controlled routes, literal gatekeeping. Nami's response is to hack the whole idea. She'll steal an eternal pose, bargain for it, or smash it on the spot if it tries to put the crew on rails. That moment after Alabaster, when she refuses to let Crocodile's eternal pose dictate their path, is basically her saying, we're not installing your spyware, thanks. She wants options, branches, backups, freedom of choice as a navigation protocol. And to be fair, this is where the Nami is the Straw Hat's operating system thing stops being a cute metaphor and becomes just accurate. She's constantly ingesting inputs, weather data, current shifts, magnetic fields, even political risk. She passes the rules of the system, then outputs routes, timing, and contingency plans. Luffy says, we go there. But Nami decides when there doesn't equal instant death. The series actually says this out loud multiple times. Skypia's knock-up stream? The only reason that insane launch works is because Nami reads a once-in-a-century current, times the entry, and rides the storm wall like it's a half-pipe. New world entry at Sabadi? Everyone else is screaming about coating. She's calculating currents and angle of descent so they don't pop like a soap bubble. Totoland is even worse, a labyrinth of sentient weather and candy currents, and the story repeatedly frames survival as good thing Nami's here, while Big Mum's own crew is getting owned by their mum's mood swings. And I want to emphasize, this is invisible labor. The crew sleeps while Nami is literally up at 3 AM, arguing with clouds and magnets so that, emotionally, they can believe in adventure instead of logistical horror. which sets us up for something we don't talk about enough. The way this constant background processing of chaos into safety doesn't stop at storms and sea kings. It quietly extends to people, the Thousand Sunny as Nami's floating observatory. And that processing people thing gets super literal once we hit the Thousand Sunny, because suddenly, Nami isn't just managing vibes, she's managing an entire floating interface with reality. The ship stops being background furniture and quietly becomes her weapon. People love to say Sunny is just going Merry 2.0, to which I say, no, Merry was a beloved camper van held together with duct tape and feelings. Sunny is a research vessel built by a cyborg who read Nami's brain and then opened CAD. On the Merry, Nami's workspace is basically a table wherever Luffy isn't currently eating. Charts get rolled, unrolled, stepped on, rained on. Her weather readings are half intuition, half, please don't let a sea king sneeze on this compass. It's cramped, improvised, and emotionally powerful, but as far as an actual lab goes, it's a mess. The Sunny shows up, and suddenly we have an observation room, an actual chart room with storage and instrumentation that doesn't look like Usopp bought it from a travelling scammer. Here's an interesting thing. The Sunny is full of spectacle features, but the ones that quietly matter most are the Nami-centric ones. Higher vantage points so she can literally read the horizon like a book. Better masts and rigging so she can fine-tune sail angles by degrees, not vibes. Windows placed so she can watch cloud layers and wave patterns without having to be on deck during a murder storm. It's like the ship itself is constantly feeding her data. And Frankie's design philosophy is basically, what if we turned Nami's paranoia into engineering? Weather-resistant hull plating, stabilizers that keep the ship steady while she's taking precise measurements, mechanisms that let her exploit currents and winds instead of just surviving them. Cuda Burst isn't only a gag rocket, it's a navigation tool. She can yeet the Sunny over a lethal weather system or time the blast to ride high-altitude jet streams like a budget space launch. Who else in the crew is even thinking in those terms? We see this in how she uses the Sunny as a tool, not just a vehicle, angling the ship to slip between storm cells, threading through the Florian Triangle fog, coordinating coup de burst as a tactical dodge instead of a panic button. She's not just steering, she's running mission control. And to be fair, the crew treats it that way. When Nami says, "We move now," the Sunny moves. Full stop. I want to emphasize how baked in that authority is. The Sunny is literally built around her ability to read the world and react to it. Every new line on her world map is drawn from its deck, turning the ship into a mobile cartography lab that's quietly breaking the world government's mapping taboos in real time. And as we push closer to Laugh-Tale, and the seas stop behaving like any sane ocean, Sunny plus Nami starts feeling less like ship and navigator, and more like spaceship and flight director. Which raises a fun question. What happens when the universe itself starts fighting back against her need to chart it? Luffy and Nami, captain, quartermaster, and the price of freedom. So when the universe itself starts fighting back, who does Luffy put on the front line? Not Zoro, not Sanji, not some haki guru. He puts Nami, which is very funny, because as far as raw power scaling goes, she is built like a wet paper economist. And yet she's the one person the Pirate King candidate consistently treats like a non-negotiable. To see why, we kind of have to go back to Arlong Park, to that one scene everybody remembers but we don't always pass. Nami's at rock bottom, stabbing the Arlong tattoo until her skin is a vague, bloody mess, and she finally breaks. Luffy, help me. This is the most cliché shonen cue for a speech about friendship. Luffy does not give a speech. He silently puts the hat, his literal dream collateral, on her head, says, "Of course," and then walks off to financially and structurally obliterate her entire world. Here's an interesting thing, that's a contract, not a romantic beat, not just a rescue, but the founding of their division of labour. From that moment on, Luffy takes responsibility for the impossible fights and the ideology. Nami takes responsibility for everything that makes those fights physically reachable. He breaks systems. She runs the system that lets him keep doing it. Watch how the story enforces this. Luffy decides they're going to Sky Island because it sounds fun, and Nami is the one screaming about knock-up streams, log poses, and the minor detail of "we will die." He wants to charge straight into Eni's lobby. She's already calculated currents and escape windows. He picks a fight with Big Mom over candy, to which I say, sure, why not antagonize a Yonko over snacks? And Nami is immediately in risk management mode, yelling about how they cannot afford this. And to be fair, everyone yells at Luffy, but he actually lets Nami win arguments. She slaps him over, blowing their treasure. She bans him from the money. She redirects their course. And the story plays it as natural. That's quartermaster authority. She's the only straw hat who can look the future pirate king in the eye and go, "No, that's stupid, we're not doing that." And the universe doesn't smite her. I want to emphasize how much that flips his big promise. Luffy tells her, "I'll take you to the place you want to go." In practice, Nami is the one literally taking him everywhere. She reads the currents, the weather, the log poses. She turns his vague, directionless dream into a plotted route. He's the destination guy. She's the itinerary. Emotionally, it's the same trade. Luffy gives Nami unconditional backing. If she says, "This island is bad news," he'll punch a god to fix it. Nami gives him a functioning stage, a ship that doesn't sink, a crew that isn't bankrupt, a schedule that isn't suicidal every single day. Which brings us to the money gag. Luffy is a black hole where finances go to die. Nami is a dragon sitting on a hoard, charging interest on emotional loans. That's funny, but it's also Arlong era trauma. When every berry was one step closer to freedom, you learn to control, to count, to never let go. So if Luffy is the dream and Nami is the invoice, that raises a nasty little question. How does the crew's emotional debt get tallied for everyone else? And what happens when someone can't pay? Sanji and Nami, chivalry, manipulation, and a very specific kind of safety. And if Luffy is writing emotional checks he fully intends to cash with violence, Sanji is the guy who walks in and says, "Don't worry, Nami Swan, your account is eternally overdrawn, and I will still cover the fees with my life." On the surface, this is the dumbest relationship in the crew. He's literally a walking, smoking cashback rewards program. Because as far as the surface dynamic goes, it's simple. Sanji sees Nami, Sanji melts. He'll cook, clean, carry, bleed, and bankrupt himself for her. Nami, in turn, will weaponize that in the most shameless way possible. She charges him more for everything, uses him as free labor, and treats his devotion like an unlimited credit line. People call her manipulative, to which I say, yes, obviously, that's the joke. But here's an interesting thing. Underneath the gag, that unlimited credit line is actually a very specific kind of safety. Sanji is the one man in Nami's life who has signed, in blood, a contract that says, "I will never hurt you, I will never question you, and I will always prioritize your comfort over my own body." After Arlong, after being literally bought and sold by pirates as a navigation asset, that is insane value. Remember, Nami grew up in a system where her body, her maps, even her village were collateral. Arlong's whole deal was turning her talent into debt. So when Sanji shows up and says, "You never have to pay me back," that hits a very specific trauma nerve. It's comedy, but it's also the first time her usefulness isn't a cage. That's why in Eni's lobby, when they're storming a world government fortress, Nami doesn't just treat Sanji like a simp. She counts on him like a specialist. She trusts him to go after Khalifa, not because he's strong, but because she knows exactly how he'll fail. His refusal to kick a woman is a tactical liability, but it's also a guarantee. In any room Nami shares with Sanji, she will never be the target. That's priceless for someone who's been objectified since childhood. Whole Cake Island takes that to an extreme. Sanji's trauma around women, Zeph's code, Judge's abuse, all get mashed into this exaggerated chivalry feedback loop. Nami's presence both triggers and soothes it. She can slap him, yell at him, call him out for running away, and he'll still put the cigarette down and cook for her. I want to emphasize that's not healthy, but it is predictable, and predictability is its own kind of safety. And to be fair, Nami does get annoyed. She snaps when his flirting becomes tactically useless. She orders him around in battle. She sets hard boundaries when his nonsense risks the mission. But notice she never actually tries to fix him. She just redirects the mess towards something useful. So what we end up with is a negotiated performance. He plays the chivalrous fool. She plays the greedy manipulator, and both of them get something real out of it. He gets to rewrite his family's cruelty into protection, and she gets a man whose love is loud, unconditional, and, crucially, non-lethal. Which raises the question, what does Nami do when the person across from her doesn't come pre-packaged with a no-harm guarantee? Someone like Robin, whose danger is quiet, intellectual, and terrifyingly familiar. Robin and Nami, two women, one world-sized secret. Nami meets Robin, and it's like the universe went, what if we gave the traumatized weather goblin a librarian of forbidden apocalypse lore? Because Robin is the first person on that ship, whose danger looks like Nami's own. Quiet, strategic, and built on knowing too much. Here's an interesting thing. Their dreams are basically orthogonal axes of the same graph. Nami wants to draw a map of the entire world, every current, every cloud pattern, every island the world government literally makes illegal to chart. Robin wants to read the world's true history, every erased kingdom, every poneglyph the same government keeps trying to blow up. One charts space, the other charts time. Put them together and you don't just get, where is Laugh-Tale? You get, what did the world have to become for Laugh-Tale to be hidden like this? And to be fair, the show hides that behind some of the calmest, most domestic scenes in One Piece. While Luffy is eating the GDP of a small nation in meat, we cut to Nami and Robin reading together in the library, or shopping for clothes, or just having this low-key girl talk about fashion and archaeology. On a ship that is 80% screaming and property damage, they are these rare pockets of non-chaotic femininity. It's like the series accidentally invented a spa day inside a war crime. Because as far as jobs go, both of them are information workers. Nami is constantly processing present data, barometric pressure, wind shifts, log poses, seeking migration patterns, the vague mess that is New World weather. Robin processes past data, inscriptions, myths, survivor stories, the pattern of which islands got wiped off the map. Nami's charts are living spreadsheets. Robin's brain is the world's most cursed archive. We actually see the synergy. Skypiea is the cleanest example. Robin digs into the Upper Yard ruins and realizes this Sky Island is literally a blasted chunk of Jaya. That historical reveal lets Nami redraw how islands can exist vertically, not just horizontally. Every time Robin mentions a lost kingdom or an island that no longer exists, you can feel Nami filing it under, cool, so the world map is actively lying to me. The Void Century isn't just lore to her, it's a giant red note that the globe itself has been edited. And both of them know what it means to be edited by power. Nami is Arlong's cartographic slave. Robin is Baroque Works' disposable brain, and the world government's perpetual target. Different systems, same exploitation. Your knowledge is useful, your life is not. No wonder their trust is so cautious at first. Nami literally surveils Robin when she joins. Robin quietly tests Nami's reactions to dark history. It's like two burned spies checking each other's paperwork. Over time, Nami kind of becomes Robin's social translator. Robin will drop something like, if this kingdom fell the same way Ohara did, we'll be annihilated. And Nami immediately reframes it for the crew as, so we just don't let that happen, right? She doesn't erase the darkness. She wraps it in something the idiots can emotionally afford. So when we talk about Luffy reaching Laugh-Tale, we love to say he'll just sail there, to which I say, With what? Vibes? If he gets there physically, it's because Nami decoded the sea and Robin decoded the century, and together they triangulated a place the world itself is trying to pretend doesn't exist. Which raises the next problem. What happens when Nami finally sees the full map and realizes how much of it was built on people like her and Robin being broken first? Vivi, Nojiko, and the sisters Nami could have been. And here's an interesting thing. When you ask what happens when Nami realizes the world is built on people like her being broken first, the story quietly answers, she could have been Nojiko, or she could have been Vivi. Those are the two save files sitting next to Nami's on Oda's metaphorical memory card. Back in Oikot, Nojiko is Nami's control group. Same house, same poverty, same gunshot sound when Belmare hits the floor. But Nojiko accepts Belmare's love without that spike of resentment. She doesn't look at the empty pantry and think, she chose us over food, what an idiot. She just kind of absorbs it. When Arlong takes over, Nami starts stealing and stockpiling belly, like a dragon with anxiety. Nojiko starts quietly stabilizing. She runs the Tangerine Grove. She supports the villagers. She's the one who literally tattoos over Nami's scar. Passive resistance, not in the sense of doing nothing, but in the sense of choosing to endure instead of to bargain with the devil. People like to say Nojiko is the healthy one, to which I say, she's just the one who didn't have to negotiate with a warlord at age 10. Because as far as the Arlong Park power system goes, Nami is the one who walks into the monster's office with a contract. She steals from pirates, she lies, she weaponizes her own reputation as a traitor. Nojiko's rebellion is, I will be here when you crawl back bleeding. And Nami's is, I will make sure we can afford to crawl back at all. Then you get Vivi, who is basically Nami if Oikot came with a palace and a dress code. Same core idea. A girl infiltrates a criminal organization, lies about who she is, and carries the weight of an entire population on her shoulders. Nami bargains with Arlong for one village. Vivi plays nice with Crocodile, while Alabaster literally dries up around her. Both of them learn how to smile while doing math on how many people might die if they miscalculate. Their bond in Alabaster is not just girlfriendship, yay. It's two people who understand that leadership under pressure is mostly about lying convincingly while your stomach is in free fall. When Vivi is screaming on that cliff, begging the fighting to stop, Nami is the one who gets it in a way even Luffy kind of doesn't. She knows what it costs Vivi to stay, just like Vivi knows what it costs Nami to leave. Vivi is the path where Nami ties herself to one kingdom, one river, one sky. Nojiko is the path where she never leaves the Orange Grove. Both of them look at Nami's mess of greed, caution, and ambition, and, crucially, they don't romanticize it. They tell her explicitly and implicitly, you did what you had to do. I want to emphasize that this is Oda saying those traits are adaptive, not innate sin. In another life, Nami hoards irrigation budgets instead of treasure, or hoards family routines instead of maps, which raises a nastier question. If Nami's survival traits are that situational, what happens when the situation changes and she suddenly has more sky than scars to navigate? Genzo, Belmare's gun, and the adults who failed and saved Nami. So when the situation changes and she finally has more sky than scars, who's supposed to teach Nami what to do with that? Because as far as parental guidance goes, her adult catalogue is basically two entries, Belmare, who dies for love in one gunshot, and Genzo, who lives for compromise in slow motion. Genzo is such a funny little narrative gremlin. On paper, he's just the gruff village sheriff with a windmill on his head. In practice, he's Belmare's ghost in a Hawaiian shirt. He resents Nami for joining Arlong. He protects her from the villagers' anger, and he literally carries Belmare's legacy in his body. Here's an interesting thing. Belmare's gun and Genzo's scars are the same sentence written in two different fonts. One is, I will die before I deny my kids. The other is, I will live with anything if it keeps them breathing. And that leads into the ugliest decision in his life, letting Nami work for Arlong. People like to say, well, what else could he do? To which I say, that's exactly the point. The whole village is trapped in a rigged system where rebellion equals instant execution. Genzo watches a child walk into a devil's bargain and decides that his job is to make that bargain survivable, not stoppable. He stands there while Arlong marks her with that tattoo and does nothing but bleed from scars he already has. Those scars, Belle-Mare's discarded gun, the empty house with the orange trees out back. These are physical props Oda keeps shoving in our faces as a reminder that the adults failed. Not because they didn't love hard enough, but because love without power is a kind of beautiful uselessness. And to be fair, that's way more brutal than just saying they were cowards. So when the villagers call Nami a traitor, Genzo snapping at them and insisting she's not one is him trying to retroactively fix that uselessness. He's the one yelling, she's doing this for us, when she's not there to defend herself. He's the guy secretly collecting her money, quietly tracking her progress toward that 100 million, literally betting his dignity on her impossible plan. But notice, he's defending her reputation, not changing her reality. The deal with Arlong still stands. If you're Nami, what lesson do you pull from that mess? Adults can love you. Adults can vouch for you. Adults cannot save you. You have to buy your own freedom, in cash, in blood, in maps. That's why she clings to money like it's oxygen, and treats her world map dream as an escape plan spreadsheet. And that logic doesn't stay in Oikot, it mutates. It becomes her lifelong skepticism toward authority figures and institutions, even the ones that are technically on her side. Marines? They stood by while Arlong ran a private tax farm. Kings and nobles like Nezumi's patrons? Corrupt. Even revolutionaries and good Marines later on get side-eyed, because as far as Nami's concerned, uniforms are just different brands of disappointment. So in her head, Belle-Mare and Genzo form this weird moral equation. Belle-Mare proves love is real. Genzo proves powerlessness is real. Put them together and you get Nami's third option. If love can't stop the gun and courage can't stop the scar, then money and maps might. She'll chart a route where the adults in the room are no longer referees. They're just weather patterns to predict, buy off, or sail around. And that's how you end up with a navigator who doesn't just read the sky. She assumes she's the only one responsible for moving it, which sounds heroic. Until she meets a captain who keeps insisting that some burdens are meant to be shared, and some adult failures can actually be rewritten mid-voyage. Tattoos, tangerines, and the economics of healing. And that rewrite doesn't just happen in Nami's heart. It happens on her skin. Because as far as branding goes, Arlong might as well have stamped a barcode on her. That original tattoo isn't cool pirate ink. It's a corporate logo for a war crime. It's a literal mark of ownership, an HR badge that says, property of the Arlong pirates do not resell. Every villager who sees it is reminded that she's one of them, and Nami has to live in that double bind where the symbol of her enslavement is also her only way to keep playing the role of collaborator long enough to save Oikot. Here's an interesting thing. One Piece is obsessed with tattoos as a belonging system. Pirate Jolly Rogers, the Sun Pirates brand over brand, the hoof of the Celestial Dragon, even Revolutionary Ink, they're all visual contracts. You're saying, this is the group I'll burn for. Nami's Arlong mark is that idea weaponized in reverse. It's belonging without consent, loyalty under duress. People like to say, well, she could have just ignored it, to which I say, you try ignoring a giant fishman gang sign welded to your shoulder in a town occupied by that exact gang. So when she finally carves it off, literally, violently, with that knife and that scream, that's not just self-harm, that's hostile takeover. And the replacement tattoo is ridiculously on the nose in the best way. A tangerine and a pinwheel. Belle-Mare's grove and Genzo's goofy hat. Her mother and her guardian. The woman who taught her that one tangerine sold, honestly, is better than stolen treasure. And the man who put on a clownish pinwheel just to make a traumatized kid laugh. I want to emphasize how quiet that new tattoo is as a declaration of independence. Other characters get giant back pieces or dragon sleeves. Nami gets produce and a wind toy. But symbolically, it's massive. She's choosing her own brand of belonging. She's saying, if I'm going to be marked, it's going to be by the people who loved me, not the people who priced me. And she doesn't stop at skin. She literally uproots Belmare's livelihood and replants it on pirate ships. First on the Going Merry, then on the Thousand Sunny, Nami builds a floating oikot. Those tangerine trees are portable home equity. It's hilarious and kind of beautiful. In a world of world-ending weapons, her big capital investment is citrus. Economically, that matters. Tangerines are small, steady income. Not gold bricks, not dragon hordes. Slow, seasonal compounding. That's Nami's whole arc in miniature. Early on, she hoards every berry like the apocalypse is tomorrow, which, to be fair, it kind of is when a fishman cartel owns your village. But once she's free, her relationship with money shifts. The Grove on the Sunny isn't just her stash. It feeds the crew, funds repairs, and symbolizes this move from desperate accumulation to sustainable shared prosperity. Watch how Oda frames that grove during emotional beats. After Skypiea, when the crew is relaxing, we get shots of them napping under those trees. Post Eni's lobby, when they're rebuilding their sense of safety, the grove is suddenly foregrounded, lush and calm. Healing, in Nami's world, isn't a montage. It's agriculture, growth, patience, cultivation. You don't fix Arlong-level trauma with a single cathartic scream. You fix it by watering something every day and trusting it won't be stolen. By the time we hit the Sunny era, money for Nami stops being pure survival and turns into a tool, a power even. She's still greedy, sure, but now that greed is pointed, she wants maps, ships, weather tech and security systems that protect the people symbolized by that tattoo and those trees. And if we follow that logic out, it sets up a fascinating question for the endgame. What happens when the girl who once sold her soul for 100 million berries is suddenly standing in front of the greatest treasure in the world with a family and a forest on her back? Sky, storms, and the slave's eye view of freedom. And this is where the series quietly does something kind of wild with Nami. It keeps pointing the camera up. When you think about her big emotional checkpoints, how many of them are literally staged against the open sky? Arlong Park isn't just Nami sobbing in the dirt. It's Nami sobbing in the dirt under this huge, empty stretch of blue, begging for a freedom she cannot even visualize yet. Same thing later. Nami on the Sunny's deck, perched on the rail, scanning the horizon with a log pose, calling out shifts in the wind before anyone else even feels them. Or Nami, arm raised, Clima-Tact pointed to the heavens, dragging a bolt of lightning down like she's filing a complaint with God. The sky is always there. And to be fair, it's never neutral. It's a character. Because as far as Nami is concerned, the open sky is a loaded image. If you grow up in a village under occupation, the sky is both the ceiling of your prison and the only visible exit sign. It's terrifying uncertainty, storms that can wipe out your crops, marines that might appear over the horizon, Arlong's flag always looming. And at the same time, it's the only direction where Arlong doesn't have a map. Up is the one axis he can't fence off. Here's an interesting thing. When One Piece gives freedom to people who've been crushed, it keeps handing them elements you can't put in chains. Luffy's body turns into this ridiculous rubber freedom machine, stretching past any boundary like he's physically allergic to being contained. Dragon shows up, and the wind itself commits treason. Skypiea wraps an entire arc around the idea that the sky, this supposedly empty nothing, can be a homeland, a battlefield, and a promise. Nami fits that pattern almost too well. Her whole power set revolves around storms, clouds, pressure, lightning, things that are literally defined by motion and change. You cannot arrest a cumulonimbus. People say, well, that's just because she's the navigator. To which I say, sure, But Oda didn't have to make the navigator the one who rewrites the weather. He chose to give the former child slave dominion over the thing that used to terrify her village. I want to emphasize how much of a reclamation that is. The same storms that once meant, if the tangerine trees die we starve, are now tools she summons, shapes, and dismisses. Weather used to be another tyrant. Now it's on her payroll. And if we zoom out, it starts to rhyme uncomfortably with other slave imagery. Fisher Tiger's sun brand gets twisted into the mark of the celestial dragons. Hancock's slave hoof is this scar she weaponizes by turning it into a symbol of untouchable beauty. Nami's version is inverted. The sky isn't a brand burned onto her, it's a space she chooses to inhabit and master. She climbs the mast, she stands on the figurehead, she claims altitude, which raises a question we're going to lean into next. If Nami's relationship with the sky mirrors Fisher Tiger's sun and Hancock's mark, what does that say about how close her story actually sits to the Fishman and the Pirate Empress? And why does the series keep pretending those parallels are just a coincidence? Nami, Hancock, and Fisher Tiger. Different chains, same system. So when the series keeps going, wow, crazy coincidence that Nami's sky motif kind of looks like a sun. To which I say, no, that's not a coincidence. That's an HR violation. Because as far as slavery narratives go, Nami is quietly sitting in the same department as Hancock and Fisher Tiger. Here's an interesting thing. Hancock gives us the clean official version of the system. As a kid, she's literally branded with the celestial dragon hoof, turned into a toy for bored gods, and then sent back into the world as damaged royal capital. She hides the mark with her hair, weaponizes beauty and pride as emotional armor, and tells the world, I'm untouchable, while still being owned by that symbol on her back. Fisher Tiger is the opposite angle. He climbs the red line, raids Maria Joie, and shatters chains by force, burning the hoof into the Sun Pirate's emblem so nobody can see where the pain ends and the rebellion begins. Now put that next to Nami's Arlong tattoo. Different shape, same job. It's a receipt. It says, this body is an asset, purchased and managed. The series keeps using these marks as accounting entries of violence. Hancock's brand, the Sun Pirate's son, Nami's sore-nosed shark. Even when Nami buys her freedom, the cost is literally written into her skin until she can afford a cover-up. And all three of them try to escape a system that was never built to let them go. Hancock gets freedom by lying with status, become a warlord, pretend the brand is a curse, smile pretty for the world government while quietly ignoring every summons she can. Fisher Tiger tries to fight his way out, liberating slaves on mass credit he knows he can't repay. And he dies because he refuses a blood transfusion from the same humans who priced his people like cattle. Nami goes for the most boring, brutal route. She treats liberation like a mortgage. 300 million berries, every map, every theft, every betrayal, all to buy back a village that was already theirs. I want to emphasize how different those coping strategies are. Hancock builds a throne out of denial. Fisher Tiger becomes a martyr whose body proves a point. Nami becomes a calculator. Her greed isn't a gag, it's a spreadsheet response to a world where islands are plantations. Fishmen are a labour pool, Kuja bodies are trophies, and Oikot village is just another line item in Arlong's portfolio. So if the whole world runs on transactions, Nami's answer is simple and horrifying. She will become the best possible negotiator of her own worth, map every current, every route, every tax, until she can audit the planet. Which raises the real problem. What happens when her world map is finished, and she finally has to look at the full global shape of that slave economy she's been unconsciously charting this whole time? The economics of survival, how Arlong turned Nami into a weaponized accountant. And here's the cursed punchline. When your entire childhood is a balance sheet, morality starts to look like bad accounting. Nami doesn't love money. She was literally raised in a world where affection without funds gets you executed on your front lawn. So let's actually reconstruct the Arlong tax meter, because as far as evil economic systems go, This one is absurdly tight. Oikot's rule is 100,000 berries per adult, 50,000 per child per month. Belle-Mère has herself, Nami, and Nojiko. That's 250,000 berries every month, 3 million berries a year, from a single ex-marine tangerine farmer whose big revenue stream is citrus and vibes. You're not paying that with Etsy money. The system is designed so that honest work mathematically cannot save you. Here's an interesting thing. That means Nami's first exposure to income is watching Belle-Mère literally choose between reporting 2 dependents or 1. The famous dinner scene? That's not just heartwarming poverty. That's a kid quietly learning that every extra plate has a price tag. When Arlong shows up and Belle-Mère says she'll pay for her daughters instead of herself, Nami isn't just traumatized. She's watching an impossible equation get solved with a gunshot. From that day on, every breath has a number attached. Nami's deal with Arlong, 100 million berries to buy the village's freedom, sounds heroic, but it's actually a self-imposed game theory trap. She knows he's a liar. We know he's a liar. Arlong knows he's a liar. But if she admits the win condition is fake, the expected value of her entire life drops to 0. So she does the only rationally insane thing. She treats a rigged constraint as real because the alternative is emotional collapse. People like to say, Nami's greedy, to which I say, sure, and a drowning person is greedy for oxygen. We see Kid Nami haggling over map prices with pirates, meticulously counting stolen cash, appraising treasure piles in panels where other children would be crying or playing. Arlong unintentionally turns her into a weaponized accountant. If she can't outfight fishmen, she'll out-arithmetic them. Volume of loot, projected savings rate, years until 100 million. She's doing compound trauma interest in her head at 8. And to be fair, that survival algorithm never turns off. On the Merry and the Sunny, she becomes the greedy navigator who charges Luffy interest, tracks debts, and demands fair treasure splits. But that's not a gag. That's her making sure no one else ever controls the ledger that defines her life. She prices her own skills, navigation, weather control, cartography, like premium services because the last time her labor was undervalued, an entire village got enslaved. I want to emphasize when she jokes about, I'll navigate if you pay me, that's Belle-Mère's corpse doing risk-reward calculations. She's not just mapping seas, she's mapping cash flow, which leaves a very uncomfortable question hanging over the grand line. What happens when that survival math finally clashes with Luffy's completely unmonetizable dream? Greed as armor. Why Nami's love of money is the healthiest thing about her. And here's the twist. When that survival math finally collides with Luffy's dream, it doesn't break her. It mutates into something way weirder and honestly, way healthier. Weaponized greed. Because as far as Arlong-era Nami is concerned, money is not treasure. It's tribute. It's a tax to stay alive. Every berry she scraped together was pre-spent, already stained with Belle-Mère's blood. That stash under the floorboards? That wasn't savings. That was a ransom note she was handwriting to her own captor for 8 straight years. It's not wealth, it's debt with better branding. Cut to the straw hats and suddenly we're in a completely different economic system. Now it's treasure money. It's prize splits, negotiated cuts, actual wages. Luffy literally hires her. She draws a map. She gets paid. She navigates a storm. She demands interest. The same coins that once vanished into Arlong's claws now jingle in her own hands as she shakes Usopp down for service fees. The object didn't change. The power dynamic did. Here's an interesting thing. Those dumb money gags people wave off as filler, they read like exposure therapy. Under Arlong, she had 0 control over prices. The rate was all of it, or your village dies. With the crew, she reenacts that imbalance, but she's the one setting the terms, charging Luffy interest on a loan he didn't understand, extorting Usopp for emotional damages, demanding a higher cut after every life-threatening detour. She's literally running the same scenario over and over until her nervous system learns, this time I'm the one writing the contract. To which I say that's not greed, that's narrative EMDR with a laugh track. And to be fair, the series keeps stress testing that system. If she were actually a pure money goblin, Alabasta is where she cashes out. Vivi is a walking political time bomb. The safe move is to take her pay and dip. Instead, Nami eats the sand, the sickness, the war, and stays. Same with the safer route debates later on. She's the one who knows the odds, knows the cost, and still refuses to abandon the idiots who keep torching her risk assessments. Eni's lobby is the hard override. Robin is not profitable. Rescuing her is the worst investment on any spreadsheet. Nami looks at the girl who once told her, "I want to live," and basically goes, "Cool, I'll bankrupt myself emotionally and physically to back that." The greed subroutine shuts off. The Bell-Mare protocol boots up. I want to emphasize, Oda uses her greed as a barometer. When Nami is joking about navigation fees, we are safely away from the girl carving Arlong's mark into her shoulder. When the jokes vanish, like in Arlong Park, like in Eni's lobby, you know the story has hit bone. So the real question isn't, is Nami greedy? It's, what happens the day those jokes stop working for her too? The Orange Orchard contract, Bell-Mare's last lesson in ownership and debt. So when the jokes stop working, what's left? An orange orchard and a receipt written in blood. Bell-Mare's last act is not just good mom sacrifices herself. It's a contract dispute. Arlong walks in with his neat little economic system. Every head has a price, every life is a line item. Pay or die. Bell-Mare looks at that and goes, to which I say, absolutely not. She chooses to pay for Nami and Nojiko instead of herself, which, under Arlong's logic, is idiotic. Why sink 100,000 berries into kids who can't fight when you could save the productive adult? Because as far as Bell-Mare is concerned, emotional value trumps survival value. Love is not a negotiable asset, so she literally dies to prove you cannot audit a family. Here's an interesting thing. The Tangerine Grove is her counter-offer. Those trees are the only thing in the village that Arlong doesn't understand how to price. Their food, their memory, they're this weird half-farm, half-grave. When Nami digs her nails into that soil as a kid, she's not just crying over a field. She's clinging to the one piece of property Arlong can't fully convert into numbers. Then Oda does something quietly insane. He puts the trees on a boat. Nami takes Bell-Mare's Grove from Oikot to the Going Merry, and later to the Thousand Sunny. That's not just cute set dressing. That's a portable deed of ownership. These trees say, we existed before Arlong, before the Marines, before any bounty poster. No registry, no world government database, no marine file can fully account for this specific tree came from my dead mum's backyard. The grove is proof that Nami's family line exists outside any official system. And to be fair, Nami treats that grove like a full-time job. On the Sunny, she's doing soil maintenance, hauling special dirt from islands, worrying about climate control in the middle of a ship that regularly dives, flies, and gets roasted by magma guys. Her weather obsession literally becomes plant parenting. She's monitoring humidity for Bell-Mare's trees the same way she once monitored Arlong's moods. The trauma that could have turned into pure violence gets rerouted into agriculture. Instead of becoming a storm, she raises one. I want to emphasize how wild it is that the navigator who can weaponize lightning spends so much panel time checking fertilizer. Every time she waters that grove, she's re-signing Bell-Mare's contract. These lives are paid for, which is why, when Nami talks about buying land, building her own map room, or owning something outright, it hits different. Every berry she hoards is secretly about never again watching her home get priced and executed by someone else's whim. She doesn't just want money, she wants leverage. The day she can buy an island and plant oranges without asking permission is the day Arlong's invoice finally clears. So the real question becomes, what happens when that private contract crashes into the biggest landlord on the planet? the world government's control over the very shape of the map she's trying to draw. Nami versus the sea, why the ocean hates her and she keeps sailing anyway. And that's where we hit the funniest cosmic mismatch in One Piece. The world government owns the map, but the ocean itself kind of owns Nami. Because as far as natural enemies go, it's not Luffy versus Akainu or Zoro versus Mihawk. It's Nami versus Saltwater. She's in a triple bind from day one. Belle-Mère is ex-Marine, which means Nami grows up with this weird second-hand respect for the institution that will later literally sell her village out on a technicality. Then Arlong rolls in with fishman supremacy, turns the sea into a racial weapon, and tells a human child she only has value if she can monetize his territory. And on top of that, every time the Straw Hats sail, the ocean is throwing storms, currents, and whirlpools at them like it read her trauma file and subscribed to updates. Here's an interesting thing. Nami is the only Straw Hat whose battlefield is always active. Zoro can sheathe his swords, Sanji can stop kicking, but the weather does not clock out. When the sky goes dark in the Baratia arc and the crew is freaking out about the sudden storm, she's the one quietly sweating while pretending it's all under control. You can actually see the pattern early. Sea monster appears, freak wave hits, log pose goes wild, and Nami's face does that micro flinch before she snaps into overconfident lecture mode. People like to say she's fearless on the sea, to which I say, watch the Arlong Park flashbacks again. Watch that kid clinging to a scrap of wood in a war zone of waves. Her fear never goes away. It just gets repackaged as, I'm going to bully the ocean with facts until it behaves. When she yells at Luffy for ignoring currents or smacks Usopp for not understanding wind shifts, that's not just nagging, that's a coping system. If she can name every cloud type, then the sky can't surprise her, right? And that's where her dream stops being cute and starts being aggressive. Draw a map of the entire world sounds wholesome until you realize it's an act of defiance against entropy. The thing that drowned her childhood, that empowered Arlong, that Marines and world government both pretend to control with tidy charts, she's going to redraw it. Every current, every climate band, every weird sky in paradise in the new world, pinned down in ink, so it can't hurt her people again. I want to emphasize how wild that is. Everyone else wants a treasure or a title. Nami wants to domesticate the planet. But what happens when she hits the end of the Grand Line and runs into something that refuses to be mapped? When the sea says no, even to her? Because if One Piece keeps escalating its weather and space-time weirdness, Nami's final test might not be conquering the ocean at all. It might be learning to sail into a storm she can't predict. And if that's true, then her last scariest enemy isn't Arlong or the world government, or even the Calm Belt. It's uncertainty itself, and Oda has already started seeding the next wave. The sky is the limit, how Nami quietly becomes a climate scientist. So when we say Nami's biggest enemy is uncertainty, we're not just being poetic, we're being annoyingly literal. Because as far as One Piece jobs go, she's doing hard science in a world where the sky randomly decides to be lava today. Think about the climate zones she's lived through. East Blue is the tutorial sea precisely because its weather is boring. Wind, rain, maybe a storm if Oda feels spicy. That's where Nami builds her baseline. Stable trade winds, predictable currents, the kind of stuff real-world sailors chart for centuries. Then she hits Paradise, the first half of the Grand Line, and the planet basically says, what if seasons were a slot machine? Winter on one island, desert on the next, magnetic fields throwing tantrums. By the time we reach the New World, every island is its own climate server with custom modded rules. Punk Hazard's fire and ice split, zoo on a moving elephant, whole cake's candy-coated weather. Nami is quietly sampling all of it. People like to act as if she's just good with weather, to which I say, mate, that's like calling Vegapunk a guy who likes gadgets. She is literally building a mental database that rivals any world government log, and she's doing it with a pen, a tangerine, and trauma. Here's an interesting thing. Every time the story introduces a new navigation rule, Nami doesn't treat it as a one-off miracle. She patches her internal climate model. Log poses? That's her first lesson in long-term magnetic drift and how this planet's core is a mess. Knock-up streams. She doesn't just scream and hang on. She studies the updraft, the seafloor currents, and files it under extreme vertical anomalies. Skypiea isn't just island in the sky, wow, for her. It's a lab on cloud composition, air pressure, and how weather can exist without a blue sea beneath it. Every time she survives something like that, the Clima-Tact gets an upgrade, and so does her theory of the world. And to be fair, when she pulls a weather hunch, that's not magic, that's compressed data. Real climatology is long-term observation, pattern recognition, and anomaly tracking. Nami's hand-drawn maps, margin notes, and scribbled arrows are basically analog climate models. She's watching how the calm belt sits next to the Grand Line, how sea kings cluster, how sky currents behave over different islands. When she calls a storm 10 minutes before it hits, that's years of logged microsignals firing in her brain at once. I want to emphasize how political this gets. Her dream map isn't just coastlines. It's going to be a visible record of damage. The permanently burning half of Punk Hazard? That's man-made climate disaster. The shattered sky patterns around Enies Lobby's giant hole in the sea? That's ancient weapon collateral. Even the red line itself is a giant wall that warps currents and wind. By the time Nami finishes, she's not just exposing geography the world government tried to censor, she's accidentally drawing a climate crime scene. And if that's true, then the final world map might double as the series' most dangerous piece of evidence, which raises a very simple question: who actually gets to see it? Log poses and lying compasses. Why Nami trusts her gut over the world's instruments. And that brings us to the funniest part of all this. Even if you hand Nami the world's most illegal, conspiratorial map, she still doesn't trust it unless the sky signs off. The world government can scream, "We control the seas," but her real boss is the barometer in her bones. Because as far as navigation goes, log poses are basically magical corporate HR. They literally force every navigator to submit to the Grand Line's rules. You don't pick the island picks you. Wait for the needle to settle, file your metaphorical paperwork, move along. And Nami hates that. She's constantly complaining about how slow they are, how they don't show danger, how they lock you into a path. That's not just nitpicking a tool. That's a girl who was raised under Arlong's protection fee system, looking at a compass and going, "Cool, another prison that ticks." Here's an interesting thing. Every time the story wants to prove that official guidance is a vague mess, it just cuts to Nami ignoring it. In Drum, she's reading weather shifts way before the log pose catches up. In Skypiea, she chooses to ride a vertical current into the sky because the clouds feel wrong, which is not a sentence a sane person says, and yet she's right. During Enies Lobby, she's steering through Aqua Laguna using wave patterns, not instruments. Even in Whole Cake, she's reading the homies and the wind together, treating Big Mum's territory like a living weather report. The narrative keeps rewarding the moments where she looks at the needle, listens, and then goes, to which I say, nope. And to be fair, it's not just tools she side-eyes, it's any institution that tells her, just follow the needle. Marines? Their wanted posters and bounties are supposed to define who's good or bad, and she immediately uses them as bargaining chips and discount coupons. Government maps? She literally wants to redraw them. The Arlong pirates sold Oikot Village a fake sense of safety in exchange for cash. So of course Nami grows up allergic to any authority that says, trust the system, it knows best. If Belmare died because a fishman cop with a sore nose enforced a rule, why would her daughter ever believe in rules she didn't write herself? I want to emphasize that this is her real superpower, not just Weather Witch with a cool staff, but someone who can tell when the world's instruments are lying. Vivre cards burn, log poses lag, eternal poses chain you to routes someone else decided were important. Nami treats all of them as suggestions. She'll use them, abuse them, break them, but the final authority is her gut and the sky. And if One Piece is quietly about a world that's being artificially steered by Imu, by ancient weapons, by a giant red speed bump wrapped around the planet, who's actually going to notice the current pulling sideways first? The guy punching it? Or the woman at the helm whose entire childhood taught her that when the official arrow points one way and the wind whispers another, you follow the whisper? Which raises a much scarier question. What happens the day Nami's gut says the whole planet is drifting wrong? From Weather One to WMD, the Clima-Tact's hidden kill count. And when your gut tells you the whole planet is drifting wrong, what do you do if you're the one person on that planet who can literally move the sky? Because as far as One Piece war crimes go, Nami is sitting on one of the quietest, funniest looking weapons of mass destruction in the series. Here's an interesting thing about the Clima-Tact. It starts as a gag. Usopp literally hands her a party store staff that makes heat balls, cool balls, and wow, look at the bubbles balls. Early on, the worst it can do is localized rain, a slippery floor, maybe a lightning strike if you solve the math puzzle correctly. Then we get perfect Clima-Tact, sorcery Clima-Tact, and suddenly that same prop comedy stick is doing battlefield-scale mirages and precision thunderbolts that erase people from panels. By the time Zeus gets grafted on, this isn't a support item, it's a portable weather satellite with feelings. Nami goes from, I can make it drizzle on this ship, to I can drop city block lightning on a Yonko homie squad. We watch her fry a massive chunk of Big Mom's forces, call down multi-bolt storms in crowded chaos like Onigashima, and the series just kind of smash cuts away. People on the internet like to claim she's the weak straw hat, to which I say, mate, your definition of power is a rushed system. Try actually quantifying what she does. A single righty-sized lightning strike in a packed battlefield is, conservatively, dozens of people in the blast radius. When she whips up those area of effect thunderclouds or localized cyclones, you're talking entire squads, siege towers, gun crews, gone. Oda almost never shows the aftermath. We cut from wow, cool storm panel to haha, look at the funny face. And the implied pile of crispy mooks is politely off-screen, so the tone doesn't turn Marineford bleak. And I want to emphasize how weird her behavior is by shonen standards. Most battle mages in this genre get a big AoE spell and immediately start spamming nukes like they're speedrunning a war crime anytime their feelings are slightly hurt. Nami doesn't. She aims at cannons, at masts, at the one giant threat. She'll knock out a squad, but she's very obviously picking angles to avoid the random townspeople. People call that cowardice or support role mentality. And, to be fair, she is terrified of dying. But it's also ethics. It's someone who grew up under artillery fire choosing not to become the artillery. Which leads to the uncomfortable question, what if she stopped caring? Imagine Arlong's occupation, but with current Nami on the other side. You don't need Sea Kings or Buster Calls. You park offshore and erase the fishing fleet with a storm no one can prove wasn't natural. You stage a single demonstration, Zeus-powered lightning obliterating a town square, and then let fear do the rest. An entire sea held hostage by forecast. And the scary part is she already knows exactly which currents, which trade winds, which harvest seasons to break to make that terror sustainable. Usopp, Nami, and the art of weaponized comedy. Because as far as pirate superweapons go, the scariest one in One Piece is not Pluton. It's a glorified party stick built by a compulsive liar and a traumatized weather nerd. The Clima-Tact is literally introduced as a joke item, and Oda plays that so hard that you almost miss the war crime potential hiding in the soap bubbles. Remember Alabaster Usopp unveiling the original Clima-Tact like he's selling you a gag gift off late night TV? Heat balls, cool balls, fun ball, soap bubbles, a manual that reads like it was translated 3 times through Google. Nami's reactions are our reactions. This is stupid. This is embarrassing. Why is my life like this? And to be fair, that's exactly the point. Usopp intentionally buries the lethality under carnival aesthetics, because if he framed it as, hey, I built you a portable execution device, both of them would have to confront what they're actually doing. Here's an interesting thing. Every time the Clima-Tact gets an upgrade, the comedy layer stays on top like a safety lid. Skypiea? Suddenly, we've got dials, and the sorcery Clima-Tact is born, and it's all sold as Nami the Weather Witch, now with 30% more party tricks. Post Eni's lobby, weather balls turn the air itself into ammo, but we're still calling attacks things like Thunder Tempo and Rain Tempo, like they're theme park attractions. Then Whole Cake rolls around, Zeus gets integrated, and the staff literally becomes a semi-sentient thundercloud that can delete people from the storyboards. And yet the presentation is, haha, Nami bullying a dumb cloud, to which I say, that's not bullying, that's asset management of a living WMD. I want to emphasize how often Nami keeps up the bit. She complains that the weapon is too complicated, too silly, has too many modes, while simultaneously pulling off frame-perfect inputs in live combat. She'll shout at Usopp for the ridiculous design mid-fight, then chain Mirage Tempo into Thunderbolt Tempo with the precision of someone who has practiced this 1,000 times off-screen. That banter is not just comedy, it's a ritual, a way for both of them to keep this emotionally manageable. We're not building instruments of terror, we're just clowns with a fancy stick, right? And this is where it slots into a broader straw hat pattern. Luffy is rubber, goofy, bouncy, invincible cartoon logic, who can punch through a battleship and cave in a god's skull. Chopper is an adorable mascot with a blue nose, who also has a form literally called Monster Point. Frankie is a cola-powered cyborg, doing Sentai poses while casually fielding battleship-grade artillery. The whole crew runs on this system of weaponized comedy, and Nami and Usopp are the engineers making that tonal misdirection feel natural. Because once you accept that, you have to ask, what happens the day they stop pretending it's a joke? Zeus, emotional support WMD, Nami's first crew member of her own. So what happens when the joke weapon stops being a joke and starts literally eating part of a Yonko? Enter Zeus, emotional support war crime, part-time thundercloud, full-time walking HR violation. This is the moment the series quietly says, what if Nami just stole a soul? Because as far as power systems go, that's what Zeus is. He's not just a power-up. He's a kidnapped fragment of Charlotte Linlin's essence that defected because someone offered him better snacks. Here's an interesting thing. Zeus's whole journey is basically a hostage negotiation that never ends. He starts as Big Mom's loyal homie, an extension of her will, literally born from her soul and fueled by terror. Then Nami clocks that this thing is both sentient and deeply food-motivated, waves a weather egg like a dog treat, and suddenly we've got this semi-reluctant partner who's betraying a Yonko because the new girl has tastier clouds. Oda plays it as comedy, but the text is screaming, she just repurposed a divine WMD as her personal ride-along. And I want to emphasize how she treats him, because it's not simple. Nami's dynamic with Zeus is this weird cocktail of scolding, bribery, affection, and genuine concern. She'll call him an idiot battery, threaten to let him die, and then immediately risk herself to protect him from Big Mom's wrath. That's Belmare's tough love, filtered through a kid who grew up under Arlong's boot and never really learned what healthy authority looks like. She knows how to yell, she knows how to incentivize, she kind of knows how to comfort, but she is absolutely improvising the parenting patch notes in real time. People might say, it's just a gag, homie, relax. To which I say, the gag is exactly where Oda hides the ethics. Zeus is sentient. He's terrified of Big Mom. He's dependent on Nami not just for power, but for identity after Hera replaces him. Nami jokes about using him purely as a living battery, and to be fair, She does abuse that power shamelessly. But she also argues for him, claims him, and refuses to discard him once he's broken. She is hyper-aware of that line between partnership and exploitation because she's lived on the wrong side of it her whole life. And this is where Zeus stops being just a cloud and starts being a prototype. If Nami's future is commanding weather homies, running a navigation guild, or coordinating a whole network of map assistants in a world where mapping is literally illegal in some places, Zeus is the test case. Does she become Arlong with better branding, or can she build a system that doesn't chew people up? Can she hold power without recreating the mess that made her? The scary part is that the series has already given her the sky. So what happens when it gives her people? Emotional treasurer. How Nami manages the crew's feelings like a bank account. So what happens when it gives her people? The answer is that Nami starts running the Straw Hats like the world's most chaotic therapy bank. Money is just the tutorial. The real account she's managing is emotional. Watch how often she steps in when the crew's about to emotionally overdraft. Luffy and Zoro start butting heads? She doesn't give a speech about friendship, she just bonks them, redirects them, or weaponizes the budget. "We can't afford you two idiots wrecking the ship," is her subtext. Post Eni's lobby, when Usopp is doing that pathetic little orbit around the crew, too ashamed to come back but too desperate to leave, who's the one who keeps the mood from curdling? Nami. She doesn't force a confrontation. She quietly keeps everyone moving until Luffy can, "I want you back," his way through the debt. And to be fair, she's not subtle with Sanji at all. Sanji's simping versus Robin's boundaries is a recurring gag, but look at who constantly recalibrates it. Nami lets Sanji pour out just enough devotion to keep his morale high, then slaps him down the second it makes Robin uncomfortable. She's literally setting a credit limit on his behaviour. You can flirt up to here, cookboy, and after that the interest rate is pain. Here's an interesting thing. She uses the exact same tools on feelings that she uses on cash. Interest, favours, I owe us, bargains. An apology to Nami is never just sorry. It's sorry, and you're carrying my bags for a week. Gratitude becomes a tab. Promises become written contracts, even if they're only in her head. Because as far as the crew is concerned, that makes emotions trackable. You hurt someone? Cool, you owe them 3 good deeds and 1 life-saving assist. Suddenly, "I messed up" isn't this vague, existential mess. It's a payment plan. I want to emphasize how early Oda shows this. In Alabasta, Nami clocks Vivi's burden before anyone else. While Luffy is yelling, "Just decide already," Nami is the one who sits with Vivi, gently but firmly forcing her to name what she wants. That's emotional bookkeeping. You can't balance a ledger if you won't write the numbers down. In Water 7, Robin starts acting distant and everyone's confused. Nami is the first to go, "Something's off," and quietly shifts the crew's attention budget toward her. Whole cake. She sees Sanji's despair the moment he kicks Luffy, and instead of exploding, she freezes him out just enough to keep him functional. That's controlled austerity. People say this is just bossy big sister energy, to which I say, no, that's trauma accounting. Under Arlong, unspoken fear and resentment literally cost her an entire village. She survived a system where nobody named the abuse, nobody tracked the emotional debt piling up behind her forced smiles. So now, she hoards feelings the way she used to hoard Beely. If she can see every balance, who's hurting, who's guilty, who's close to snapping, maybe she can stop another Arlong Park before it starts. And if that sounds dramatic, remember, when Luffy says, "You're my navigator," he's also accidentally saying, "You're our emotional treasurer." So what happens when the world itself tries to audit that account? Nami and Luffy, the Pirate King's CFO and his only real stop sign. When the world tries to audit that account, it actually runs into a weird problem. The Pirate King's treasurer is also his only functioning brake pedal. Because as far as Luffy is concerned, the sea is infinite, the meat is unlimited, and consequences are kind of a suggestion. right up until Nami says, "Turn the ship around." Here's an interesting thing. Almost nobody in this series can make Luffy stop. Admirals can't, Yonko can't, Garp barely can. But Nami? She points at the log pose, says, "We're not going into that current," and the future Pirate King just goes, "Okay." Think of Drum. He wants to charge up the mountain in a blizzard. She frames it as, "The crew will die," and suddenly he's listening. Or Jaya and Skypiea. He's all in on going to the sky. She can't disprove the route, so she commits to figuring out how. When she says, "We can't afford this fight, the ship and crew come first," he yields. Not because he's scared, but because that's the contract. And that contract is signed in blood at Arlong Park. The help me scene is not just trauma catharsis. It's a business deal with god-tier emotional terms. She's been trying to buy back her village with impossible money, and Luffy strolls in and basically says, "I'll pay the impossible cost. You never have to do this alone again." To which I say, that's the moment she becomes his CFO. He assumes her debt, Arlong, the Marines, the world. So in return, she's the only one allowed to say, "No, you can't spend your life like that. We can't afford it." She can put constraints on his freedom because he literally freed the part of her that was already dead. I want to emphasize how asymmetric but balanced this power system is. Luffy never questions her maps, her weather calls, her sense of currents. When Nami says "storm incoming," he doesn't ask for proof. He just tightens his hat and trusts. And, to be fair, she never questions his choice of destination. He says, "We're going to Alabasta." She figures out the route. He says, "We're saving Robin." She doesn't ask if it's smart. She asks how many sea trains it'll take. He picks the people and the islands. She decides how they survive the path between them. That division of authority keeps both of them from turning into tiny tyrants. Luffy doesn't become a joyriding god who ignores the crew's limits, and Nami doesn't become a risk-averse accountant who vetoes his dream. But what happens when the route is not a current? It's toppling the entire world order. In the endgame, when Luffy is throwing hands with history itself, Nami's job is not to cheer and wave a flag. It's to say, if you punch here, these islands flood. If you break this symbol, these people starve. She becomes the moral bookkeeper of his revolution, the one calculating collateral damage in real time. And if you think that sounds too heavy for the girl who bonks him for spending too much on groceries, just wait until we talk about how her dream, mapping the whole world, forces her to look at every single person who will live or die under the Pirate King's new sky. Nami and Sanji, chivalry, debt, and the price of protection. And speaking of people who live and die under that sky, we kind of have to talk about the human weather vane that is Sanji. Because as far as the series is concerned, Nami is the barometer for whether his chivalry is funny, tragic, or actually horrifying. Go back to East Blue. Bharati Sanji takes one look at Nami, hears "I like money," and immediately speedruns, "I will abandon my job, my found family, and my legs for you, my queen." He's pledging eternal loyalty to a woman who is literally planning to rob him and run. And to be fair, Nami does not hesitate for a second. She clocks the power system instantly. This cook will do anything for a pretty face. Perfect. Weapon acquired. That's the joke setup. Sanji as the world's thirstiest bodyguard. Nami as the ruthless manager of his simp energy. She orders, he complies, we laugh. But here's an interesting thing. From the very start, Oda ties that gag to debt. Zeph's debt. Sanji's, "I owe my life to women." Nami's, "I owe 100 million to a fishman war criminal." It's two trauma scripts colliding in real time. Fast forward, and the tone quietly mutates. Remember Sanji starving himself on the Bharati as a kid? The series replays that in miniature every time he cooks for Nami before himself. But Whole Cake Island is where Nami stops finding it charming. When he kicks Luffy half to death, she doesn't go, "Wow, he's so devoted to me." She slaps him, calls him out, and then, crucially, cries for him when he can't even cry for himself. The self-sacrifice that used to be free labor for her suddenly looks like a death wish. People like to say, Nami just uses Sanji, to which I say, mate, you're a rush system. Early on, yes, she milks it. She charges him for affection. She weaponizes his chivalry to dodge danger. But watch the language shift. She starts calling him our cook, not my servant. She gets furious when people mock him as a failure prince. When Judge throws him away, Nami is the one who bites back, treating Sanji's dignity as crew treasure. I want to emphasize how wild that is for her. This is the girl who grew up in a literal protection racket, who learned that everything has a price. Safety, freedom, even your own body. Sanji walks in with the exact opposite doctrine. Women are priceless. My suffering is free. Their whole relationship is a negotiation between those two ideas. Somewhere in the middle, they build a weird little treaty. Sanji learns that protecting someone doesn't mean erasing yourself. Nami learns that not every act of care has to be itemized and invoiced. And once they hit that point, she starts protecting his right to be more than her shield or her wallet. Which raises a bigger question. If Nami can rewrite the price of one man's life, what does that say about the way she values the entire world she's trying to map? Nami and Robin, two wanted women, one shared quiet war. And if Nami is quietly rewriting the price tag on one man's life, we kind of have to talk about the other woman on the ship, whose existence the world literally tried to appraise and erase at the same time. Nico Robin. Because as far as first impressions go, Nami and Robin start in a pretty bad place. Post-Alabasta, Robin just strolls onto the Merry like the world's most beautiful jump scare, and Nami's reaction is basically, cool, so the assassin with a bounty joins for free? She's polite, she's pragmatic, but you can feel that tension in little things. The way she side-eyes Robin's casual knowledge, the way she keeps her distance when money or maps are involved. Like Robin's presence is another unknown variable in a world that already robbed her once. Here's an interesting thing though, that suspicion doesn't melt in a big shonen friendship beam. It melts in Water 7 and Enies lobby, when Nami hears what really happened to Ohara. Up to that point, Nami's trauma is pirates, Arlong, a village held hostage for 100 million berries. Robin's trauma is the entire world pointing a buster call at a library. Different scale, same wound type. Your knowledge is illegal. Your dream is a crime. When Nami hears that, you can see the shift. The navigator who sold her soul to buy back a village suddenly recognizes a woman who never got the chance to buy anything back at all. And to be fair, Oda doesn't hammer this with speeches. He buries it in domestic scenes. Robin reading, while Nami draws maps on the Sunny's deck. Shared baths, where the conversation is about shampoo, not trauma. Shopping trips, where Nami is calculating budgets and Robin is just quietly enabling like, yes, buy the third pair of boots. This is for research. In a crew that is a constant loud mess of meat, explosions and emotional breakdowns, their companionship is almost suspiciously calm. It's the eye of the storm, sitting at the ship's center. That calm has rules. Nami never mocks Robin's obsession with the Void Century, even when it brings heat from the world government. She defends Robin's right to know, to investigate, to chase poneglyphs the way she chases currents. And Robin, in turn, never undercuts Nami's navigation. When Nami says, "We're changing course," Robin backs her publicly, even if she's just read some ancient tablet that says, "By the way, this route killed a civilization." It's a quiet power-sharing system, map and history, sea and stone, each guarding the other's domain. I want to emphasize how rare that is in One Piece. The world government literally bans accurate maps of certain seas. It criminalizes true history. These two women are walking violations of international policy just by doing their jobs correctly. So when the story finally hits the point where the Void Century's secrets collide with the world's true geography, Laugh Tale, the All Blue, the redrawn borders of an oceanic empire, you can see exactly who's going to be at the table. Nami isn't just drawing a map. Robin isn't just reading a book. Together, they're co-authoring the world's patch notes. The Last Road poneglyph Might as well be a co-signed document. Robin decodes the sentence, Nami sketches where it leads, and suddenly the Straw Hats have literally rewritten what the world even is. And if two wanted women can realign the planet's story like that, what does that say about the supposedly chosen men standing next to them? Tattoo palimpsest, how Nami rewrites her own skin. And if two wanted, women can realign the planet's story like that, what does that say about the supposedly chosen men standing next to them? It says the real endgame isn't who sits on the throne, it's who gets to hold the pen, or, in Nami's case, the needle. Because as far as One Piece body horror goes, Nami's back is one of the quietest and nastiest examples. That original Arlong tattoo is not pirate drip. It is a livestock brand. It's slapped onto a child navigator specifically to say, this brain, these hands, this body belong to Arlong's economic empire. The girl who can draw the sea becomes state property. And when she digs her nails into that mark, when she literally carves at her own skin in front of Genzo, that's a kid trying to erase a map someone else drew on her. Here's an interesting thing. Nami is a cartographer whose first map is her own enslavement. Arlong draws his sigil on her before she ever gets to draw her world. Every time she looks in a mirror, the route is the same. Oikot to Arlong Park, to 100 million berries or everyone dies. Her self-harm is not random despair. It's an attempt to scramble the coordinates, to make the path unreadable. If the mark is gone, maybe the contract is void. It's magical thinking, but it's also the only power she thinks she has left, which is why the replacement tattoo hits so hard. The tangerine and pinwheel design is cute merch bait, sure, but it's also a palimpsest. It's Belmare's oranges, it's Genzo's dorky pinwheel, it's the whole of Oikot village stacked over Arlong's crest like layered parchment. She doesn't pick some edgy skull. She picks the two adults who loved her, without a price tag. The joke is that Nami finally belongs again, but this time to people who would rather die than cash her in. And to be fair, Oda could have just hidden it. He could have put the new tattoo somewhere we never see and called it a day. Instead, post Arlong Park, Nami's wardrobe becomes aggressively backless. People like to shout fan service, to which I say, yes, and it's doing narrative labour. She used to hide the mark under bandages and high collars. Now she's a walking billboard for the rewrite. Shame becomes signage. The body that was a receipt is now a protest poster you cannot ignore. I want to emphasize how consistent this is with One Piece's whole visual language of branding. Hancock's slave mark, Fisher Tiger's scars, the Sun Pirate's sun tattoo that literally overwrites the hoof of the celestial dragons. This world is obsessed with who gets to draw on whom. Nami's back quietly joins that conversation. She doesn't adopt the sun mark, but she does the same move. Overwrite, don't erase. Her body becomes one more panel in this shared anti-slavery mural running through the series. And once you see her like that, not just the hot navigator, but a moving, breathing revised document, you start to wonder what other straw hats are still carrying first drafts they haven't rewritten yet. Money, maps, and freedom. Nami's personal theology of value. So once you realize Nami is basically walking around as a redrafted document, you also have to admit something mildly horrifying. She's running her own internal economy like a tiny, traumatized world government. Except her version is actually fair, because as far as Nami is concerned, the universe has a very specific exchange rate. At the absolute top cites information, maps, weather data, sea currents, log pose behavior. Below that, the people she's claimed as hers. Money comes third, not because she's greedy in the shallow gag sense, but because it's the one tool that can shield the first two. Everything else? Negotiable. Ships can be replaced. Islands can be skipped. Pride can be swallowed. If a deal gets her closer to better charts or keeps the crew alive, she'll probably sign it. Here's an interesting thing. That dream of drawing a map of the entire world sounds like a cozy travel blogger goal, to which I say, mate, this is a war crime in progress. The world government literally bans mapping certain seas. Information is a monopoly. Nami's map is not a scrapbook. It's a moral document. She's trying to make the ocean legible, so no one can hide cruelty behind uncharted territory ever again. Arlong used the gaps on the map as a hunting ground. The government uses them as plausible deniability. Nami's answer is, fine, I'll erase the gaps. I want to emphasize how political that is for someone who just wants money. When she tracks weather patterns, when she feels a squall before the log pose twitches, that's surveillance being reclaimed from the people who weaponized it against her village. Her Clima-Tact starts as a joke weapon and turns into a staff that can literally rewrite the sky. That's not random power creep. That's her theology of value evolving. First she sold maps to survive. Then she used maps to escape. Now she uses knowledge of the weather to decide who gets to live through the next storm. And to be fair, her obsession with clear prices and fair splits looks like a gag until you remember Arlong's bookkeeping. His entire occupation was a rigged casino. Arbitrary tribute, shifting debts, interest rates that changed whenever a human got uppity. That's the same energy as heavenly tribute and bounties, hidden taxes on existing at sea. Nami's counter-ideology is radical transparency. She yells about every lost berry, spells out every deal, and turns the crew's finances into a running bit because explicit numbers can't be quietly weaponized against you. So what happens when this system finally works? When the orange grove on the Sunny is secure, the world map is almost complete, and she has more money than Arlong could have dreamed of stealing? What does someone who has built their whole life on measuring value do when she has enough data to realize some things can't be priced at all? And what is she willing to burn down, maps and all, to protect the one thing she decides can never be sold? Because we might already have our first hint. From prisoner to navigator-in-chief, Nami's full story power creep. Bold claim time. Nami is one of the most overpowered characters in One Piece, and it has almost nothing to do with combat. People get hung up on bounties and beam struggles, to which I say, cool, enjoy your laser show, while the woman who decides where the ship even goes quietly rewrites the entire board. Because as far as power curves go, Nami's is weird. We start with a kid in Oikot village, literally drawing maps for the people occupying her home. Her first skill tree is survival economics. If she can quantify the sea, if she can price her own freedom at 100 million, maybe the chaos stops. That's not a shonen training arc. That's a hostage doing math. Early East Blue Nami is all negative space. She can't confront Arlong, she can't protect Belmer, she can't even be honest with the people she's using. Her strategy is lie, steal, run. She's good at it, but it's still reactionary. The sea moves, the pirates move, she adapts. Fast forward to post-Whole Cake and Wano, and suddenly she's the one making the sea move. She's commanding Zeus like a living weather satellite, dropping localized thunderstorms on Big Mom's forces, manipulating battlefield climate in a way that makes half the New World's log poses feel redundant. The girl who once hid behind buildings while Arlong smashed everything is now casually talking back to emperors and telling Luffy when he actually has to retreat. Here's an interesting thing, Oda almost never frames this as Nami got physically stronger. The Clima-Tact evolves from Usopp's gag weapon into a god-slaying staff, but each upgrade is basically a UI patch for her brain. Weather balls, sorcery, Clima-Tact, then Zeus integration. It's a system designed to externalize what she already has. Absurd meteorological intuition. The power fantasy isn't she can punch harder now, it's her understanding of the sky is so good it became artillery. And to be fair, Oda could have just slapped armament haki on her and called it a day. Instead, he quietly scales her influence. Control over routes. She decides which suicidal detour is survivable. Control over information. She reads the currents, the log poses, the newspapers, the bounties. Control over tempo. She's the one yelling at Luffy and Zoro when it's time to run, or greenlighting the insane plan when the odds are finally in their vague favor. What does that do narratively? It turns her from the girl in the crew into the de facto strategic brain of a Yonko ship. Luffy points, Zoro cuts, Sanji kicks, but Nami is the one who quietly chooses which impossible situation they even walk into. She's also the emotional treasurer, deciding when the crew can afford to be reckless with their hearts. I want to emphasize, if we keep treating her like a mid-tier support character, we're going to miss her endgame completely. We kind of have to start reading Nami like a top-tier power player, whose stats are dumped into navigation, economics, and emotional leverage instead of haki and punch force. Because if that's true, then her final power-up isn't a new staff mode. It's a new kind of authority over the entire world map. So what does it look like when someone like that finally finishes drawing the world and decides which parts deserve to be erased? The quiet Yonko. Why Nami is closer to Emperor status than you think. So here's an interesting thing. When we talk about Yonko, we picture Kaido doing a belly flop onto a country, not a girl in a bikini top yelling about budgets. But if you strip the branding away, a Yonko is basically a regional manager of chaos. They control territory, they hoard information, they move money, and they can project force. And to be fair, that's already Nami's job description, just scaled down to one ship and a handful of idiots. Because as far as the series actually shows us, territory in One Piece isn't just land, it's roots. Big Mom has her territorial sea slugs. Whitebeard had protected shipping lanes. Blackbeard squats on strategic islands. Nami? She turns the Thousand Sunny itself into a mobile territory. She decides which currents to ride, which calm belt pockets are survivable, when they can cut through Big Mum's turf or sneak past marine patrols. Every time she says, "We're taking this route," she's literally drawing the temporary borders of Straw Hat influence on the fly. People like to treat Luffy as the one invading Yonko waters, to which I say, he's just the weapon. Nami is the one who chooses whose backyard he's getting launched into. Punk Hazard, Whole Cake, Wano, those aren't random. They're calculated trespasses, picked by the only person on board who understands how the ocean itself responds. That's a kind of soft power the emperors use too. They just do it with fleets instead of a sunny-shaped sports car. Then you've got the economic side, which is where Nami stops being funny greedy girl and starts looking suspiciously like a baby Big Mom accountant. She manages the crew's treasury, she negotiates pay, she weaponizes debt. Her deal with Vivi in Alabasta, her constant haggling with local guides, even her partnership with Zeus, these are micro-level versions of Yonko politics. Big Mom trades protection for candy. Nami trades survival for information and cash. Same system, smaller scale, less homicide. And I want to emphasize how wild Zeus actually is. That's a living piece of a Yonko's soul that she flipped through charisma, fear, and incentives. That's not just stealing an asset, that's poaching from an emperor's internal HR department. Tell me that doesn't feel like the kind of sneaky alliance shifting we see between real top-tier powers. So when we zoom out, what do we have? A navigator who decides territory, a treasurer who controls liquidity, a deal maker who forges local alliances every island they hit, and a weather witch who can literally change the battlefield conditions. That's a mini emperor package. The only difference is that her territory is still mostly theoretical lines on a map and not yet recognized by the world. Which raises a problem the story hasn't answered yet. If this is what Nami can do with one ship and a dream, what happens when the map is finished and every sea route quietly runs through her? Or, scarier question, who in power has already realized that's where she's headed? Post One Piece, Nami, the woman who'll redraw the world, literally. So if every route quietly runs through Nami, that means the big secret endgame of One Piece is a girl with an orange grove becoming Google Maps for a post-apocalypse. Which sounds like a joke, to which I say, that's literally the point. Because as far as this story is concerned, whoever draws the map decides what the world even is. We keep treating Nami's dream, a map of the entire world, like it's this cute travel poster. But look at when she said it. A kid under Arlong's occupation, banned from leaving, banned from owning her own village, swearing she'll chart seas she's not even allowed to look at. Once the Void Century comes out and the red line probably gets turned into gravel, that dream stops being cartography and starts being regime change. You're not just drawing islands, you're redrawing borders, trade routes, and which gods people believe in. Here's an interesting thing. Nami is physically tracing the same path as the poneglyphs, without ever needing to read a single glyph. Robin decodes history. Nami turns that decoded history into lines, distances, and currents. The moment you plot Laugh-Tale, the ancient kingdom, and all those forbidden islands on one continuous sheet, that map itself becomes a political artifact. Imagine her final chart. All the missing islands the world government erased. Every Calm Belt current she cracked. Every Sky Island and Fishman route they pretended didn't exist. And to be fair, the world government has always kind of known this. They literally ban mapping certain seas. They control log poses. They weaponize misinformation about the Grand Line structure. Nami's whole career is a quiet rebellion against that information monopoly, from stealing Arlong's maps to replanting Belle Mare's tangerines on the Sunny like a little agricultural middle finger. Her Clima-Tact upgrades are the same idea in weapon form. She doesn't just read the weather, she rewrites it. So post One Piece, when the old propaganda collapses, whose version of the planet do people trust? The celestial dragons with their missing continents? Or the pirate navigator whose charts actually get you home alive? Nami's final world map has a real shot at becoming the new baseline reality, copied in every port, taught in every school, used by every kingdom that wants to pretend they were always cool with this whole freedom thing, which sounds heroic until you remember who's holding the pen. Nami's morality was forged under occupation and literal child slavery. She learned that maps can be extortion tools, that knowledge is something you sell to survive, that borders are just lines drawn by whoever has the most guns that day. I want to emphasize, she's good, but she's not naive. So if the woman who grew up weaponizing navigation ends up defining reality for the next era, how much of that new world is going to be freedom? And how much is going to be Nami quietly deciding what everyone is allowed to see? And if she does start choosing, even a little, who gets safe routes? Who gets left off the chart entirely? At what point does the ex-slave with the pen start to look uncomfortably like the people who once owned the seas? Emotional treasurer. How Nami quietly owns everyone's debt. So here's an interesting thing. Even if Nami never hoards a single sea route for herself, she's already been quietly controlling something way scarier than navigation. The crew's emotional balance sheet. She is the Straw Hat's treasurer on paper, sure, but as far as actual power goes, she's their emotional accountant. Watch how she interacts with Luffy. From the second he puts the hat on her head at Arlong Park, he's basically taking on infinite debt. I will destroy the world that destroyed you. Nami never forgets that transaction. Every time she yells at him for wrecking the ship, or slaps a price tag on his stupidity. That's not just a gag. That's her way of saying, you still owe me staying alive. He thinks they're even because he freed her once. She knows the ledger says otherwise. Sanji is even more explicit. He runs a constant deficit of chivalry. Meals, compliments, life-threatening rescues. Sanji is out here doing a 0% interest loan of devotion. Nami plays into it with the heart eyes manipulation, the "you'll do this for me, right?" routine, to which I say, yes, it's funny, but it's also her putting numbers on what used to be vague and terrifying. If everything has a cost, then nothing is random. Belle Mare didn't die because of some arbitrary mood swing of the universe. In Nami's rewritten system, you pay, you get something, end of story. Usopp is the opposite side of the ledger. He's the guy who literally gave her the Clima-Tact as a joke and then spent the rest of the series paying off that prank with upgrades. Nami never lets him forget it. Every weather buff, every new staff, she itemizes. You owe me making this work. And to be fair, that pressure is part of why Usopp becomes an actual engineer instead of just a liar with a slingshot. With Robin and Vivi, the accounting gets way more serious. Vivi's whole Alabasta arc is Nami watching a princess try to carry a country's debt on her back. Nami charges her for the ride, sure, but she also quietly cancels part of the bill by backing Vivi's impossible choice without demanding repayment. Same with Robin. Nami clocks immediately that Robin is walking around with a planet-sized guilt balance. She could weaponize that. We saved you, you owe us. But she doesn't. She accepts Robin's "I want to live" as full payment and stops collecting. And I want to emphasize the Nojiko and Jinbei moments, because those are Nami's cleanest debt cancellations. As a kid, she tells Nojiko not to get involved, tries to keep her out of the Arlong contract. As an adult, she does the opposite with Jinbei. She has every right to invoice him for Arlong with compound interest, and instead, she forgives him on the spot. That is wild for someone whose entire survival mechanism was never forget what people cost you. By the time we hit the endgame, Nami isn't just tracking berries and tangerines, she's running audits on guilt, promises, and second chances. She's the one who knows who's overdrawn on self-sacrifice, who's hoarding pain, who needs a write-off. Because as far as emotional systems go, nobody in One Piece understands interest, leverage, and forgiveness, quite like the girl who once bought back her own freedom at 100 million berries. Which raises a different, slightly terrifying question. If Nami is the one quietly deciding whose debts get erased, what happens when she finally decides it's time to collect on the world itself? Greed, but make it ethical. Nami's personal economic system. So here's a spicy take. Nami is the only character in One Piece whose greed is ethical, not moral in a soft, cozy way. Ethical in a brutal, spreadsheet way. She looked at the world's economic system, saw child slavery but with extra steps, and went, cool, I'm speed-running capitalism any percent until I can break it. Because as far as Nami is concerned, Arlong already showed her the default setting. His tribute economy is economics 101 by way of war crime. Value is whatever you can extract at gunpoint. Every month you pay or you die. Your house is collateral, your children are collateral, your body is collateral. And to be fair, that's not just Arlong. That's the world government's whole vibe, just with uniforms and paperwork. Here's an interesting thing. Post-Arlong, Nami doesn't stop playing the game. She just flips the rule set. With Luffy, with random towns, with literal sky people, she keeps testing one idea over and over. What happens if you replace coercion with consent? Skypiea is the funniest version. She's bargaining for payment to go up into a cloud death zone, charging extra for hazard fees, and you're like, wow, scammer arc. But watch the pattern. She only pushes people who have a choice. No villagers with guns to their heads, no kids buying back their lives. If you can walk away, she'll charge you rent for staying. That's where her 3 kinds of greed kick in. Survival greed is the most obvious. Never be powerless again. Never let oikot happen twice. That's why she hoards money, why Belmare's oranges get replanted on the sunny like a diversified trauma portfolio. Then there's revenge greed, taking from the world that took from her. Every time she robs a pirate crew that's basically Arlong with worse branding, that's wealth redistribution with extra steps. And finally, healing greed, demanding fair value for her worth. Navigation fees, weather consultations, I'll save your life, but it's gonna cost you. That's Nami saying, I am not free labor ever again. Look at her fees for navigation. She literally charges her own crew interest in early arcs. But the joke is that when it actually matters, Arlong Park, Alabasta, Eni's Lobby, she will burn every last berry for her people. She's the girl who tried to buy a village's freedom at 10 years old. You really think she cares about a few missed payments when Luffy is bleeding out on a rooftop? So no, Nami's endgame isn't less greedy. To which I say, why would we want that? Her final form is more precise. Money stops being a hole she's trying to fill and becomes a tool she's aiming. World map in one hand, Clima-Tact in the other, ledger in her head asking, how do I rig the economy so no kid ever has to buy their own sky? And if that sounds dramatic, wait until we talk about what happens when she stops just reading the weather and starts rewriting it. Weather Witch of the New Age. The future of the Clima-Tact. Because rewriting the weather is exactly what the Clima-Tact has been doing this whole time. It's just been disguised as a running gag that accidentally grew up. The original Clima-Tact is literally a joke stick. Usopp hands Nami this 3-piece baton loaded with heat balls, cool balls, and thunderballs, and we all go, okay, funny party trick, moving on. But here's an interesting thing, every upgrade after that is Nami outsourcing her power to someone else and then choosing to trust that. Usopp's perfect Clima-Tact, Frankie's sorcery Clima-Tact with dials, and then Zeus, an actual homie cloud, ripped from a Yonko's soul and turned into her glorified weather Roomba. People like to say, Zeus made Nami strong, to which I say, no, Zeus is Nami's apology for the series ever pretending she was weak. The staff keeps changing hands in the background, Usopp's engineering, Frankie's cyborg nonsense, Big Mom's living storm. But the constant is Nami deciding, yeah, I'll let you into my system. It's literally trust as a power-up path. So, where does that go in the final saga, when everyone else is unlocking advanced friendship haki? Because as far as escalation goes, we're kind of running out of normal sky. Sea-stone integration is the obvious crazy idea. Imagine a Clima-Tact that can pin down devil fruit users by ionizing the air around them, like a mobile calm belt. Suddenly Nami isn't just calling lightning, she's deciding who the atmosphere itself will ignore. And to be fair, that's still the conservative option. We're walking around in a world with a giant hole in the ocean, a sky island built on a knock-up geyser, and a probably weaponized ancient space laser named Uranus. If Uranus is even vaguely weather-related, you can absolutely see Oda going, what if the girl who wanted to map the world accidentally becomes its climate admin? Nami plugging ancient Void Century weather tech into her staff is the most on-brand endgame. The navigator becomes the firmware update. I want to emphasize how early Oda started seeding this. Skypia's mantra, the knock-up stream, the calm belt, the New World's islands that are just one joke away from being Mario Kart tracks. This world treats the sky like a moody character. Nami is the only person who looks at that mess and goes, yeah, I can read this. Her weather sense has always been drawn like a superpower. She predicts Arlong's storm as a kid, she calls currents that log poses can't, she feels climate shifts before the ship does. That's observation on a planetary scale. So if the world government has been quietly turning the sea and sky into a gun for centuries, what happens when the girl who survived Arlong's personal climate of fear steals that gun, dismantles it, and hands the storm back to regular people? And if that's where her staff is headed, what does the world look like the first time she points it at the red line and says, clear? Mirrors in chains, Nami, Hancock, and the pattern of enslaved women. And here's an interesting thing. The moment Nami points that staff at the red line, she's not just nuking a rock formation, she's nuking a brand. Because in One Piece, the real endgame boss isn't Big Rock, it's the idea that certain bodies exist to be owned, labelled and displayed. So let's talk brands. Nami's Arlong tattoo is the budget version of Hancock's celestial dragon hoof. Same function, different tax bracket. Both are literal barcodes burned into skin to say, your property now. Nami carves hers off and overwrites it with a tangerine and pinwheel. Hancock hides hers under hair and jewelry. One turns the mark into a memorial, the other into a secret. But both are doing the same spiritual move. You don't get to write on me anymore. I want to emphasize that this is not subtle. Oda is literally screaming, slavery is a branding problem, and then handing every survivor a metaphorical rebrand kit. And to be fair, neither of them walks away fine. They walk away functional. Nami weaponizes greed, Hancock weaponizes vanity. The world told Nami, your value is how much money you can make for us. So she leans into it so hard it becomes armor. I only care about money is a shield, because as far as she's concerned, if everything is a transaction, then no one can own you for free. Hancock does the same thing with beauty. The celestial dragons turned her body into a trophy, so she preempts that gaze by making it a weapon. You're all beneath me is just trauma in 6-inch heels. People love to call Nami selfish, to which I say, yes, obviously that's the point. Her selfishness is a survival algorithm. She will rob you, scam you, and charge you interest, but that's because the last time she trusted a system that claimed to be benevolent, it put a Sawshark logo on an 8-year-old and called it a day. Now, put that next to Jinbei and Fisher Tiger. Same root horror, completely different coping builds. Tiger breaks out of Mariajoie and decides, cool, time for large-scale armed rebellion. Jinbei follows that path into the Sun Pirates, turns the slave brand into a sun, and tries to burn the whole institution down. Nami doesn't have an army. She has a pen, a map, and an Excel sheet brain. Where Tiger and Jinbei go macro, raids, banners, ideology, she goes micro, hyper-focused, personal economic warfare on Arlong's balance sheet. She's running a one-girl IMF in short shorts, and that's why her story quietly hits harder than almost any of them. Tiger's rebellion is epic. Hancock's tragedy is operatic. Jinbei's guilt is mythic. Nami's is just a kid, a village, a room full of blood-stained maps, and a number she can't quite reach. It's the most grounded, small-scale version of this whole pattern, and it becomes our emotional tutorial for One Piece's slavery discourse. Before we ever see Mariajoie, we've already felt what it's like to be owned. So when the series later throws Sun Pirate brands, hoof marks, and fishman discrimination at you, your brain has a reference file labeled Arlong Park. And the question becomes, if Nami could rewrite her brand and her weather, what happens when that logic hits the entire world economy of chains? Tattoos, tangerines, and tides? Nami's personal symbol system. If Arlong Park is Nami rewriting the weather, her body is where she rewrites the ownership papers. The series literally turns her skin into a legal document and then forges a better version on top. We start with the Sun Pirates mark, repurposed by Arlong into a corporate logo of slavery. That first tattoo is loud, spiky, unfriendly art direction. It's not a vibe, it's a barcode. Every time Nami's arm is framed, the show is quietly reminding you, this girl's navigation talents are being run on stolen hardware. People like to say, oh, it's just edgy 90s character design, to which I say, why does the camera keep treating it like a crime scene? Here's an interesting thing. When she finally carves it off, Oda doesn't replace it with some cool pirate emblem. It's tangerines and a pinwheel. That is the least shonen tattoo imaginable. It's Belmare's orchard, plus Genzo's goofy hat fused into a crest. The overwrite is the point. We go from property of Arlong to product of a village, from a sun that branded her to the sun that fed her. And to be fair, it's almost obnoxiously on the nose, but that's why it works. Every panel of that new tattoo is her walking around with a portable family registry, which leads into the oranges themselves, because as far as symbol systems go, Nami's is aggressively agricultural. Belmare's tangerines are home, food, debt, and love all stapled together. When Nami digs them up and replants them on the Going Merry, then the Sunny, she's doing something quietly wild. She turns a static East Blue village into a mobile safe zone. The Thousand Sunny isn't just a ship, it's Oikot Village on New Game Plus. Wherever they dock, the orchard is there first, saying, this place is pre-approved. Her clothes do the same thing, just with more midriff. Early on, she's in thief gear, practical, darker tones, ready to sprint away with a bag of cash. Post Arlong and especially post time skip, the wardrobe gets breezier, brighter, more open. Is some of that just Oda discovering fashion magazines? Absolutely. But watch when the sky motifs show up. Cloud patterns, blue and white stripes, airy fabrics that look like they'd flap in a sea breeze. The girl who used to survive storms by predicting them is now dressed like she owns the forecast. I want to emphasize how often Nami is framed against clear skies and rainbows after major emotional beats. Arlong Park ends with that double rainbow over the village. Skypiea gives her a waiver and an actual ocean of clouds. Whole Cake lets her literally weaponize Zeus, a chunk of the sky, into her personal lightning dog. She graduates from storm survivor to stormcaller. The Clima-Tact is basically her PhD. And all of this loops back into the world map dream. When she says she wants to chart the entire globe, that's not just big geography nerd goal. It's a promise that her personal icon pack, tattoo, tangerines, pinwheel, clear skies, is going to get scattered everywhere. Each island she maps is another place where her symbols landed, took root, and refused to move. By the time that map is done, it's not a neutral chart. It's a collage of all the places she stopped being someone's property and started being part of the climate. Which raises a fun little question for later. If Nami can redraw the borders of her own life like that, what happens when she starts redrawing the borders of the world itself? The map and the myth. Why Nami is the most human straw hat. And here's where the joke turns kind of rude for the rest of the cast. The person redrawing the borders of the world is, functionally, the least special straw hat in the power system. No devil fruit, no on-screen hacky flex, no secret giant bloodline, just a girl, a stick, and a weather app she built in her garage. Because as far as raw escalation goes, One Piece has completely lost its mind. We have future sight, internal organ explosions, sun god flamenco. And in the middle of that, Nami is still the one who gets scared by a big roar, still the one who will absolutely hide behind the tallest crewmate available. People like to clown on that as cowardice, to which I say yes, and that's the point. She's reacting like a normal human in a world that runs on kaiju logic. Here's an interesting thing. Her dream doesn't actually require any miracles. No chosen one lineage, no secret prophecy, no ancient weapon key. To map the world, you need time, ink, and the stubborn refusal to die of scurvy. That's it. Which makes her victory the most replicable one in the crew. You cannot become Joy Boy in real life, but you can absolutely pick a gigantic, borderline stupid long-term project and just keep adding tiny lines to it for decades. And to be fair, Nami is not some aspirational saint while she does this. She's petty, she's greedy. She will charge you interest on emotional labor. She lies, she manipulates, she weaponizes tears and legs and basic arithmetic. Oda doesn't purify her after Arlong Park. He just changes what those same tools are pointed at. The girl who robbed pirates to buy back her village becomes the woman who bullies a Yonko's homie into becoming her personal thundercloud. That mess is why she feels like an actual person. She doesn't grow out of her flaws, she grows around them. She still loves money, but now it's Belmare's Orange Grove on the Sunny. A literal investment portfolio of grief and security. She's still terrified in fights, but she goes back in anyway, because someone has to make sure Luffy doesn't steer the entire ship into a lava waterfall for fun. I want to emphasize how quietly radical that is. In a series drowning in destiny talk, Nami's arc is the myth of a normal person in an insane world. Not the strongest, not the chosen one. She's the one writing everything down so the rest of us can understand it later. When the gods and monsters are done punching holes in the sky, she's the one who turns the crater into a landmark and scribbles, "Don't go here without a coat." And if that sounds small next to punching a dragon, remember, whoever controls the map controls what normal even looks like. Which raises another uncomfortable question for the world government. What happens when the girl they once priced at 100 million starts pricing the whole planet instead? Recharting the series. What Nami changes about how we read One Piece. Because as far as the series is concerned, freedom isn't some abstract anime poster quote, it's a logistics problem. Luffy screams, "I want to be free!" And we all cheer, but Nami is the one quietly going, Cool, what's the route, what's the cost, and who's cooking the books on the weather? One Piece loves to pretend it's about vibes and friendship, but the second you follow Nami's pen instead of Luffy's fist, it turns into a story about who's allowed to draw the borders of that freedom in the first place. Here's an interesting thing. Nami's dream literally collides with the world government's censorship. She wants a map of the entire world in a universe where certain islands are erased from public charts and whole seas are treated like corporate NDA zones. Log poses, New World routes, Laugh Tale itself. These aren't just adventure flavor text. They're a control system. If you don't know where something is, you can't sail there, you can't trade there, and you definitely can't revolt there. The government bans mapping the Calm Belt. Nami reads the currents and does it anyway. That's not just navigation, that's information warfare with cute earrings. Watch Alabaster through her eyes. Luffy sees a guy made of sand. Nami sees a country being throttled by drought, manipulated supply, and a literal monopoly on rain. Crocodile weaponizes scarcity. She weaponizes the sky with the first Clima-Tact. It's not just a gag staff, it's her saying, if you're going to turn weather into a tool of power, I'm going to steal the user manual. Skypiea, same deal. Luffy sees Cloud Fun Land. Nami immediately clocks an island that doesn't exist on any map, a priesthood hoarding dials and climate knowledge, and a god who literally sits on a giant golden bell that doubles as a GPS ping to the rest of history. Eni's lobby is even nastier from her angle. The Buster Call isn't just firepower, it's cartographic erasure. You don't just kill people, you delete coordinates and pretend they were never on the map. Robin is hunted for reading history. Nami is quietly dangerous for wanting to chart geography. Different disciplines, same crime, making the world legible without asking permission. And to be fair, the government is right to be terrified because once you can point at a map and say, why is this blank? You've already started a revolution. Whole Cake Island cranks this up again. Luffy sees Rescue Sanji. Nami walks into a sugar-coated surveillance state where weather itself is franchised out to Big Mom, and Zeus is basically a living NDA cloud. She steals him. Of course she does. The girl who grew up under Arlong's tax system understands weaponized climate and weaponized debt better than anyone on that ship. People like to say One Piece is about being free, to which I say, mate, you're a rushed thesis. It's about who gets to decide what free even means on a planetary spreadsheet. Routes, log poses, forbidden islands, that's the series quietly asking, who controls what you're allowed to know? And I want to emphasize, Nami is the one literally drawing that answer, which leaves us with a slightly uncomfortable question. If Nami is the only straw hat who can calculate both the cost and the coordinates of every freedom they win, who is this story actually talking to, and what happens when her map is finally complete? The ledger, so far, rapid-fire recap of Nami's core pillars. So before we dive even deeper into the conspiracy board that is Nami, we should actually do the boring responsible thing and total up the ledger so far. Because as far as character economics go, Nami is one of the most you get what you pay for builds in the series. Origin pillar first. Oikop Village is basically a lab experiment in controlled despair. Belmare adopts 2 war orphans she can't afford. Arlong rolls in with a racial supremacist tax system, and suddenly, love has a price per head. Nami watches her mother literally die because the math doesn't work out. That's where the survival calculus is born. If you don't know the numbers, you die. If you can't pay, you're property. Her greed isn't cute, it's armor. Every berry she steals from pirates, every map she draws for Arlong, is her trying to brute force an equation where one village girl buys back an entire island. And to be fair, if you grew up with an orange grove watered in blood, you'd probably start treating money and maps like religion too. Second pillar, skill. Nami isn't just good at navigation, she's a walking traumatized weather satellite. She reads currents, sky color, wind temperature, log pose behavior, and somehow turns that into "we won't die today." The cartography dream, mapping the whole world, isn't just a cute hobby, it's a direct violation of a world government that literally censors geography. Then we bolt the Clima-Tact onto that. It starts as Usopp's gag staff, with party tricks, a joke weapon in a shonen power system, and quietly evolves into a divine weather rod that calls down lightning, manipulates mirages, and partners with a semi-sentient thundercloud. Here's an interesting thing. Nami's power-ups are never raw strength. They're upgrades to her ability to predict, deceive, and rewrite the environment. Third pillar, relationships. Nami keeps emotional books on people. With Luffy, the debt is existential. He freed her from Arlong, so she entrusts him with her dream and the crew's treasure. Nojiko and Genzo are her original investors in hope, the ones who bet on her con even when they knew it was a con. Vivi is the proof of concept that Nami can navigate politics and friendship at the same time. Sanji is comic relief on the surface, but he's also the guy who never questions her value. Robin and Jinbei sit in the heavier column. Fellow survivors of state violence, people she has every reason to hate or distrust, and yet she eventually marks them as paid in full with forgiveness. She is, functionally, the crew's emotional treasurer. Last pillar, symbolism. The tattoo swap from Arlong's mark to the tangerine and pinwheel is her balance sheet rewritten, Belmer and Genzo over Arlong's brand. The oranges on the sunny are a portable shrine to her past, constantly generating sweetness from something that started as starvation. Sky imagery follows her everywhere. Weather maps, mirages, lightning, Zeus. She's the woman who negotiates with the heavens. Money jokes, wanted posters, and bounty haggling keep her tied to the theme of value in a world that price tags everything, including people. And she quietly mirrors every enslaved or branded character we meet, from Hancock to Fisher Tiger's legacy to Arlong himself, except she's the one whose dream is literally to redraw the world that did this to all of them. So if we compress Nami into a quick ledger, origin trauma that turns into survival math, god-tier navigation wrapped in a gag weapon, a network of debts and forgiveness, and a body covered in symbols of ownership she keeps rewriting, which raises the next problem. If her whole life is about balancing impossible books, what happens when she finally hits a number the world can't afford? Why Nami matters more than your favorite punch. And here's where we upset like 60% of the fandom in one sentence. Nami matters more than your favorite punch. You can delete a lot of people's signature moves from One Piece and the story kind of limps along. Zoro doesn't get a Sora. Cool, he still cuts things. Luffy never invents Red Hawk. He's got, 14 other rubber gimmicks. But take Nami's navigation, her economics, her quiet emotional accounting out of the equation, and the entire journey literally faceplants into the calm belt and dies. Because as far as spectacle goes, One Piece trains you to worship the punch. We remember Luffy ringing Enies lobby like a bell, Zoro taking nothing at Thriller Bark, the rooftop in Wano. That's the poster material. But here's an interesting thing. Every single one of those moments is prepaid by hours of invisible labor. Route planning through currents we don't understand. Dodging storms that should have killed them 3 arcs ago. Budgeting food, tangerines, and ship repairs so the crew can afford to be idiots. That entire survival tax? It sits on Nami's shoulders. People like to say, well, any navigator could have done that. To which I say, cool, name 3 other navigators in the series who can read the sky like a mood ring, bully the log pose into cooperation, and also stop Luffy from trading the Sunny for a cool hat. We'll wait. The joke is that Nami is greedy, but the power she actually wields is control over when the dream can spend hit points. She decides when they can burn the sails for a dramatic entrance, and when they're one storm away from becoming seeking snacks. And to be fair, this is bigger than Nami as a character. She's the unglamorous backbone archetype of every grand adventure. The quartermaster, the logistician, the person with the clipboard saying, "No, you cannot suplex the government today. We are out of food." One Piece just literalizes it. Luffy is the will. Zoro is the sword. Nami is the system that lets that will move through an actual ocean without dying of exposure and bad decisions. I want to emphasize how much of the plot quietly hinges on her making a call. Arlong Park only works because she spends years doing trauma math and still leaves a way out. In Alabasta, she's the one tracking the clock on Vivi's country, while everyone else is busy having boss fights. In Skypiea, she literally pilots a ship through clouds, reads a sky current no one believes in, and parks them on a floating island instead of in a crater. Rewatch with a Nami filter on, and it gets kind of unsettling. How many times does she drag Luffy away from a fight they can't afford yet? How often does she clock Sanji's spiraling or Usopp's insecurity and quietly nudge the mood back on course? How many arcs only function because she's willing to take a risk on a route or refuse to let someone's feelings slide into the background? Once you see it, the series stops being Luffy's wild adventure and starts looking like Nami's impossible escort mission of one future pirate king, which raises a different question. What happens to a world when the person holding the map decides the destination isn't good enough? Your personal grand line, applying Nami's logic to real life. So what do you actually do with that question? Because as far as we're concerned, this is where Nami stops being just a character and quietly becomes a life tutorial wrapped in orange trees and tax fraud. Not wake up at 5 a.m. and grind tutorial, more maybe stop sailing blind in a storm with no log pose tutorial. First thing, navigation. Nami never just points and vibes. She knows the currents, she reads the weather, and then she decides whether today is a safe route day or a let's literally fly the ship to Skypiea day. Translating that out of Grand Line brain, your currents are your circumstances, money, health, family, location, the vague mess of stuff you didn't choose. You don't control them, but you'd better chart them. Your weather is your mood and your risk level. Are you in a storm of burnout? Is this a calm sea where you can try something insane? Nami checks both before she commits. The Nami-coded move isn't never take risks. It's take ridiculous routes when the treasure justifies the damage report. Here's an interesting thing. Nami also keeps a relationship ledger long before she keeps the Straw Hat's treasure. Arlong's tattoo is literally a debt mark. Belmer's oranges become this living receipt she carries onto the Sunny. So as a thought experiment, who do you owe emotionally? Who covered your metaphorical 100 million berries when you had nothing? A teacher, a sibling, some friend who showed up at 3 a.m. with food? Flip it. Who still owes you? And not in a petty way, but in the you keep fronting emotional cash and they never pay attention back way. And to be fair, some of us are still paying interest on old pain, like Nami walking around with that tattoo, long after the original creditor is gone. At some point, she redraws the mark and writes the debt off. Where are you allowed to do the same? Then there's the greed. People joke that Nami is just a walking tax audit, to which I say, good. She's the only one in that crew who treats her time and skills like they have actual market value. What would it look like if you priced your own navigation like that? Charging properly for your work, saying no to free labor, not discounting your expertise just because it feels nice to be needed. And then, paradoxically, being willing to throw all of that away the moment it conflicts with your core people or your core cause. Nami will rob you blind for a berry and then burn a fortune to save a village. That's not hypocrisy. That's a hierarchy of values. I want to emphasize one last Nami-coded idea, the world map. She's drawing hers island by island, trauma by trauma, sky by sky. You're already doing the same thing with careers, friendships, obsessions, all those side projects you swear you'll finish. The most Nami thing you can do is treat that inner map like it's real. Update it when you grow. Admit when a sea is dead, calm, and you're bored. Admit when you've outgrown an island. Because once you start seeing your life as a grand line, you're actively charting. The next question becomes way more dangerous. Who exactly are you trusting as your navigator? Final coordinates. Closing the map on Nami for now. And that's where we circle back to the allegedly hot take we started with. Nami is one of the most misunderstood, undercredited straw hats. People love to rank swords and punch strength, because those are easy numbers to argue about on Twitter. But after walking through her trauma, her greed, her weather sorcery, her emotional accounting, if you still think she's just the navigator, you weren't paying attention. Because as far as actual survival goes, she is the axis. Luffy can punch a god, sure. Zoro can bisect a building. None of that matters if the ship quietly dies 3 days out from Reverse Mountain because someone misread a current. Nami is the one reading log poses, catching those half-second pressure shifts, moving the sunny 5 meters to the left, so an Emperor's flagship cannonball lands in empty water instead of in Usopp's face. That's not flavor text, that's a power system. Here's an interesting thing. When Oda wants to show the crew at their most desperate, who does he cut to? The girl at the chart table, sweating over isobars and currents. The Arlong Park map room. The Sky Island log calculations. The orange trees she replants on the Sunny, turning Belmare's death into a living, photosynthesizing memorial. She literally carries the past, plots the present, and sketches the future on one ship. And to be fair, the series doesn't always spotlight that. It's way flashier to show Nami dropping a Zeus turbocharged thunderbolt tempo that erases a Yonko's homie army than to show her quietly budgeting food, bandages, and morale. But that's exactly why she gets written off. Her economics are invisible until they fail. Her emotional labor is a vague background hum until she stops doing it, and suddenly Luffy is sulking, Sanji is spiraling, and Robin is back in I don't deserve to live mode. I want to emphasize this final image. End of an arc. Night sea, thousand sunny cutting through the dark. Everyone else is sleeping, arguing, snoring, being a mess. Nami alone at the bow, map in one hand, Clima-Tact in the other. Behind her, gods, monsters, legends, a future pirate king. In front of her, a horizon only she can actually read. She is literally steering myths toward a future that still doesn't have a name yet, but she's already sketching the coastline. So where did Nami finally click for you? Was it the help me at Arlong Park? The way she slaps Luffy back to his senses in Drum? The casual confidence of walking into Whole Cake with Zeus at her shoulder? Or some tiny moment like her quietly covering Genzo's medical bills? Drop your favorite Nami scene in the comments, the one that made you realize she was carrying more than just a map. And if you want more of this kind of character autopsy, stick around. We've got deep dives planned on other Straw Hats, the really cursed corners of One Piece lore, and probably at least 3 videos arguing about whether Oda actually planned any of this. Spoiler, he didn't, and also he absolutely did. Subscribe so you don't need a log pose to find your way back.